start over? All right, so for the record. Okay, so I'm going to call to order the hearing of the Senate Select Committee on Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs, and I want to again welcome everyone here. Particularly want to thank the City of Rosemead for hosting our hearing here today. Thank you so very much for letting us use your chambers, and really appreciate everything that you've done to make this happen. So I want to thank Assemblymember Ed Chow and the staff for also helping make these arrangements. And particularly, I also want to thank the Asian American Advancing Justice, and particularly Andrew Medina on the staff, who has worked so hard to help us secure our speakers today and help us organize this hearing. And of course, I want to thank all the speakers who are speaking today as well. Your testimony is going to be very important to the Select Committee and to the state of California. So my name is Dr. Richard Pan. I'm the state senator representing Senate District 6, which includes the cities of Sacramento, West Sacramento, and Oak Grove. I'm also a practicing pediatrician, and I'm the chair of the Senate Select Committee on Asian Pacific Islander Affairs. In fact, we held our first hearing just last week in the Bay Area, where we covered Asian Pacific Islander health issues, in particular the fact that Asian Pacific Islanders are disproportionately affected and actually die from cancers that are caused by infections such as hepatitis B causing liver cancer, HPV causing cervical cancer, and H. pylori causing stomach cancer. Today's hearing is focused on immigration and the API community. Now, APIs are actually now the fastest growing immigrant group in California, and actually compose the largest proportion of immigrants to the state of California right now. And certainly immigration has been a major issue in politics both here in California and across the United States, particularly starting with Prop 187 here in California. And the rhetoric that has become this particular election cycle has become particularly vitriolic, with the Republican nominee Donald Trump making anti-immigrant and anti-trade policies the centerpiece of his campaign. Now, as people talk about immigration, they often view it as perhaps primarily more of a Latino issue, but certainly this issue is one that affects the API. You know, when Trump launched his campaign claiming that they are bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and saying that we need to build a wall, some people view that as just about the API community. But however, anti-immigration rhetoric is very much targeted against the Asian Pacific Islander community. And in fact, when we talk about build that wall, Chinese Americans were actually the first illegal immigrants here in the United States during immigrating from Mexico and before crossing the border to the United States after the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which actually was in place for over 60 years. So even as there's rhetoric about banning Muslims from this country, we have to remember that we banned Chinese Americans and other Asian Americans from this country for decades. In addition, Trump has actually called for banning all immigrants from the Philippines. So this is not simply history, we are hearing it today. Rhetoric trying to ban API from coming to this country. And shockingly, the rhetoric against Muslim Americans, this presidential campaign, has also led to leaders such as the mayor of Roanoke to state that the unjust internment of Japanese Americans during World War II may have been a good idea. And it's and not the shameful episode it is in American history. And I would also note, even as the rhetoric against Muslims have been applied, that Asia actually has one of the largest Muslim populations in the world. Furthermore, we're hearing rhetoric, we're hearing that many governors are refusing to accept Syrian refugees, including women and children, into their states. However, refugees are very much a part of API history in our country. Many API came to America as refugees, particularly our Vietnamese, Hmong, and Mien after the Vietnam War, but certainly other API members as well. So anti-immigrant rhetoric has been specifically targeted toward the API community directly. In fact, during the Republican primary, presidential candidate Jeb Bush actually stated that the real immigration problem was actually Asian anchor babies. So America is great because of the contributions of immigrants and their descendants. And today we're going to try to get past the rhetoric that unfortunately is poisoning the discussion and try to address the realities of the API immigrant experience. We as API, Asian Pacific Islanders, are not eternal outsiders or foreigners in this country, nor are we the model minority. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are integral to American politics, economics, and our culture, and we have challenges that need to be addressed. America would not be great without us. And with that, I look forward to a very informative hearing. And with that, also, I would like to also ask if Assemblymember Chow, and thank you so much for joining me today, wish to make some opening remarks as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pan, for convening this very important hearing today with the focus on the needs in the immigrant segment of the API community. I also want to welcome everyone to the 49th Assembly District, which I've been representing for the past 4 years. In fact, the 49th Assembly District is the first legislative district in the continental United States with a majority Asian Pacific Islander or API population. We have 53% of our constituents comprised of APIs. It is also a gateway for many newcomers from the Pacific region. In addition, the San Gabriel Valley right here has been historically a suburban destination for many APIs who sought to find housing and other community opportunities. Our district is also a destination that is well known for our cultural amenities as well as restaurants. That's correct. Books have been written about this city, such as Monterey Park and the demographic transitions that took place in this region during the 1980s and also the 1990s. And politically, the San Gabriel Valley has been a training ground for many of our leaders, and because of the enormous opportunities for elected and appointed positions at all levels of government. And when we look at many of the policy issues that are unique to the API community, we need to look none other than the 49th Assembly District and here in the San Gabriel Valley as truly a policy laboratory of what has been done and what needs to be done, such as immigration. So I'm very glad to be here today to join in the conversation. And Senator Pan mentioned earlier that APIs are the fastest growing group in not only in the state but also in the country. And in fact, in the past few years, many of us have worked together to address issues that still reflect xenophobia that is directed at many APIs. And just recently, many of my colleagues and I had to issue statements denouncing programmings in the media, such as the O'Reilly Factor and its offensive Water's World piece of New York's Chinatown community. Or one can never forget Jimmy Kimmel's offensive remarks on the show about killing all Chinese. And there's still a perception that APIs are still foreigners in their own lands. And at the same time, there are stereotypes that we are the minority, the model minority. And early in my term in the Assembly, I convened a roundtable discussion not too far from where we are today at the Asian Pacific Family Center to discuss the issue of mental health, because unfortunately it is still a taboo subject matter, and particularly for immigrant population. And when we fail to raise and highlight these issues, then our silence implies that we don't really need the resources to address the issue. And more recently, I've met with local API entrepreneurs on the issue of fraudulent Americans with disability or ADA lawsuits. And many local businesses are family run, and they live barely by the skin of their teeth with the thinnest of profit margins. They are preyed upon by unscrupulous predators who wish to take advantage of language barriers, or they're unfamiliar with our government system. And particularly, the issue is prevalent in the immigrant community. We know that when it comes to disparities in education, healthcare, job training, and familiarity with accessing public services as well as civil engagement, there's still much work that needs to be done. So I'm very glad that this hearing is being held here today, Dr. Pan, and thank you. And this will be a series of, as Dr. Pan mentioned, a series of what will be a statewide needs assessment. And I look forward to all the testimonies, and I want to thank all the presenters for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Chow. Before we begin, I also want to acknowledge we also have here attending former Assembly member but Community College Board member Mike Ng. Thank you so much for being here, Mike. And representing Senator Hernandez's office, Janet Chin, who's here. Thank you, Janet. Welcome. And I believe you're also a former school board member as well. Right?
That's right.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to open up our hearing with a presentation on the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander demographics briefing by Jeffrey Yang, sorry, Yang, who's a research analyst with the Asian Americans Advancing Justice in LA. Welcome.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Yang. I'm a research analyst over at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Los Angeles, and I'll be providing an overview of the demographics for Asian American and Pacific Islanders in California. So, Advancing Justice Los Angeles produced this particular report on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders in California as part of our Community of Contrast reports. The purpose of this particular report is to promote a better understanding of Asian American and NHPI communities in California. The report contains data on over 30 Asian American and NHPI groups, relying heavily on census data compiled for easy access. Examples of some of the charts included in the report will be shown during this presentation. So, there are 5.7 million Asian Americans living in California, making up 15% of California residents. This is based on 2014 estimates, so the number is actually probably higher by now. So again, 15% of California residents are Asian American. Filipino, Chinese, and Vietnamese Americans are the largest Asian American ethnic groups in California. In California, there are 320,000 Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, making up 1% of California residents. Native Hawaiians and Samoan Americans are the largest NHPI groups. So here we have the population growth chart for more context. Asian Americans, NHPIs, and NHPIs were the fastest growing racial groups between 2000 and 2010. The Asian American population grew 34%, as you can see in the chart, while the NHPI population grew 29%. This is in contrast to the total population for California, which grew only 10%, and the white population actually declined by 5%. This is the population chart, disaggregated by individual ethnic groups. So South Asians are the fastest growing Asian American ethnic groups in California. Among NHPI groups, Fijian, Tongan, and Tongan Americans are the fastest growing. I can leave it here for a couple seconds. You can see some of the South Asian groups at the top, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Sri Lankan, very fast growing populations in California right now. So the fastest growing Asian American communities in California are actually in Riverside, San Bernardino, San Joaquin, and Sacramento counties. In terms of sheer numbers, Los Angeles County, Santa Clara County, and Orange County have the highest number of Asian Americans. This is the same table for the NHPI population. The fastest growing NHPI communities are in Riverside, Stanislaus, Sacramento, and San Joaquin counties. And again, in terms of numbers, Los Angeles, San Diego, and Sacramento counties have the highest numbers of NHPIs. This is the chart for those who are foreign-born by individual ethnic groups. 59% of Asian Americans in California are foreign-born. In other words, there are 3.1 million foreign-born Asian Americans living in California. There are 47,000 foreign-born NHPI living in California. Nepalese, Burmese, and Sri Lankan Americans have the highest proportions of those who are foreign-born. So this may help us better understand the diversity of issues that Asian Americans and NHPIs in California face. Uh, 416,000 undocumented Asian Americans are living in California, making up 15% of the state's undocumented residents. There's no official California estimate, but this is based on national estimates alongside with the numbers for foreign-born Asian Americans in California. So there are 6,000 refugees from Laos who settled in California between 2004 and 2006. Most were Hmong, though some were Lehu, Laotian, and Mien refugees. 85% of refugees from Asia who settled in California between 2007 and 2011 were Burmese, Vietnamese, and Bhutanese. So although the next series of data are for the general Asian American population in California, not specifically to only immigrants, knowing that immigrants make up a large portion of the Asian American and NHPI population in California can help us understand the diversity within their experiences. So here we have the poverty and low income rates. The top bars for each ethnic group represents the low income rates. The bottom bars for each ethnic group represents the poverty rates. So Hmong, Mongolian, and Cambodian Americans in California are more likely than any racial group statewide to be low income and poor. We can also see why disaggregated data is important, as there is a large disparity among Asian Americans in terms of poverty and low income status. Although 10% of Asian Americans in California are living in poverty, which you can see towards the bottom. It's purple. I guess you can't really tell on the screen. So 10% of Asian Americans in California are living in poverty. This is in contrast to 34% of Hmong Americans who are living in poverty, who are way at the top. Among NHPIs, Tongans also have a higher than average rate of poverty at 20%. So again, disaggregated data provides some context on how people were doing relative to the total population, to relative to other racial groups, or relative to other ethnic groups within their own racial groups. This is a chart on limited English proficiency. So what that means is, at least for those who are 5 years of age and older, this is percentage of those who say they speak English less than very well. So limited English proficiency isn't terribly surprising considering the larger immigrant population, but again, it's interesting to see it broken down by ethnic group. Over 1/3 of Asian Americans and a majority or near majority of some ethnic groups are limited English proficient in California. For Burmese, Vietnamese, Korean, and Taiwanese, and Hmong Americans, they have among the highest rates of limited English proficiency. So here's additional language data in case you're curious. 3.6 million Californians speak an Asian or Pacific Island language. 72% of Asian Americans. It's not working. 72% of Asian Americans and 39% of NHPI speak a language other than English at home. It's not working. Just click next. Yeah, that's fine. So we can see that Chinese, Tagalog, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, and Hindi rank the highest on this chart. Next slide. This next chart is on educational attainment. For each individual ethnic group, the top bar represents those with a high school diploma. The bottom bars represent those with a bachelor's degree or higher. So Vietnamese, Laotian, Cambodian, Hmong, and Fijian American adults are less likely than the average California adult to have a high school diploma. Compared to the average Californian adult, Vietnamese, Laotian, Cambodian, Hmong, and NHPI adults across all ethnic groups are less likely to have a college degree. Next. And here's some health data. This is based on 2008 and 2010 data, so it's a bit outdated, and the rates are likely going down, but it's also important to question why some Asian American ethnic groups were among those most likely to be uninsured, and question if this trend still exists today, which I currently don't have data on, but it's still important to think about. So does this relate to poverty rates, limited English proficiency, or something else? I'm sure this will come up later in later discussions. Next slide. And here we have data on home ownership and rentership. While it's not shown on the chart itself, let me explain the chart first. On the left side of the chart shows home ownership rates. On the right is rentership rates. This is by ethnic group. So not shown on the chart, but over 310,000 Asian Americans and nearly 15,000 NHPI households in California are struggling to find affordable rental housing, meaning they spend 30% or more of their income on housing. So certainly this is important to think about, considering the previous slides about poverty, but also considering that rentership rates are actually pretty high for a lot of groups. Yeah. So in addition to the Community of Contrast report, Advancing Justice LA also produced a report called Asian Americans at the Ballot Box. So this report provides a better understanding of the civic engagement of California's fastest growing racial group and identifies opportunities for and challenges to greater influence. In other words, why does this all matter to you? Next slide. Next. So 1.7 million Asian Americans were registered to vote in California as of the 2012 presidential election. Next. The number of Asian Americans registered to vote in California increased 60% between 2002 and 2012. Next. Asian Americans will make up nearly 11% of California voters by the 2016 presidential election. Next. Next. So, are Asian American registered voters concentrated in such a way as to exert real influence? While only 3 legislative districts in California are majority Asian American, Asian Americans make up a quarter of constituents in 25 legislative districts statewide, 7 congressional, 6 state senate, and 12 state assembly districts. These are concentrated primarily in the Bay Area and Southern California. I'm sure all of you are trying to decipher what this chart means. So on the left side, you can see the district numbers. On the right side, the 4 columns, that's percent of Asian American in the population, percent voting age population. The second to last column is percent citizen voting age population. In other words, percent of Asian Americans who are eligible to register to vote. And the last column for 2012 is percent of Asian Americans who were actually registered to vote. Next. Okay. So one of the report's most striking findings revolves around the degree to which the number of Asian Americans registered to vote in legislative districts exceeds the margin of victory between candidates in those districts. So let me explain this chart again. On the left, you have the districts. On the right, the margin of victory. So for example, let's look at the second row. Congressional District 52 is Peters. Peters won the election by almost 7,000 votes. In that district, there were a little bit over 36,000 Asian American registered voters, meaning the margin of victory was 517%. In other words, if all Asian Americans who were registered to vote went out to vote, they could have easily influenced the election. So we found that the number of Asian Americans registered to vote exceeded the margin of victory in 38 congressional, state senate, and state assembly races. The number of Asian Americans registered to vote exceeded half the margin of victory in 75 legislative races statewide. So throughout the state, we see real opportunities for influence. So I hope this presentation helps frame the discussions that will be happening later on for the remainder of the hearing. You can check out a number of our reports. We have other regional reports as well, but we also have Los Angeles County Report, San Diego County Report, Orange County Report, etc. It's all online at advancedjustice-la.org/demographics. You can find the California report, ballot box report there too. So thank you for having me, and I guess we'll take questions later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll take questions after the next presentation. Before we move on, though, I also want to recognize we have here Becky Cheng from Congresswoman Chu's office. Thank you. All right, then should recognize you earlier. And then also Thomas Wong from State Controller Betty Yee's office. Thank you. Thank you also for being here. Okay, so our next presentation is on a policy priority survey of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community-based organizations and nonprofit, presented by Reshma Shamasunder. Did I get that right? Okay, thank you. Welcome.
So I'm Reshma Shamasunder, and I'm a consultant with Asian Americans Advancing Justice Los Angeles. I'm going to be talking a little bit about immigration at the federal level. Give me the first slide. So just, a brief history. Often, I think, as Dr. Pan had stated earlier, that immigration is often viewed as a Latino issue in the United States. But based on what we heard around demographics, Asian Americans have a lot at stake. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have a lot at stake in the immigration debate at the federal level. And the reason that we're kind of bringing this forward to a state body is that California's voice is pretty loud, and California has a lot to gain and a lot to lose around federal immigration policy. So we hope this, will inform you as we're thinking about immigration next year, as we have a new administration moving forward. So just to give you a brief history, and I'm sure you've all followed this, there's been multiple immigration reform efforts over the last couple of decades. The most recent one being in 2013. And as you may remember, there's a real focus on a pathway to citizenship, which is critical. As we heard, Asian Americans make up 15% of the undocumented population here in California, so this is something that we care about. The 2013 proposal did put forward a potential pathway to citizenship, but there were a lot of trade-offs. Increased border security, beefed up national security that specifically impacted South Asian and Muslim communities, compromises to policy areas that Asian Americans cared about, like visa backlogs, family unification, and others. And there was a lot of organizing in the API community at that time. So we have momentum from which to build moving forward, but we thought it was important to consult with Asian American communities around what they cared about regarding federal policies. And so that's what we did, and we're hoping to release this report sometime next month in advance of the new administration coming forward in January. Next slide, please. So we spoke to almost 60 participants representing 17 states. All of these organizations in some way represent Asian American Pacific Islander communities, either their grassroots groups or their advocacy groups, or they serve clients directly. As you can see, 65% local, 17% state, 14% national. And we asked them questions about what they considered important policies around immigration, and then looking at some of the proposals that had moved forward in the past, what they would consider good policies versus negative or bad policies, and then really what they vision moving forward for Asian American Pacific Islander communities when it comes to federal immigration issues. Next slide, please. So this is just, a pretty information-heavy slide, so you can kind of take a look at it, but I'll just break some of it down. This talks a little bit about the participants and who they were, and this is kind of the answers that were given to the questions that we asked. And so if you see to the right, not surprisingly, one of the most pressing issues that came up was pathway to citizenship. Asian Americans do care about this, and they want to see a pathway to citizenship. But we had both some good conversations in the interviews, as well as pieces that were written out in the surveys around the other things that were priorities for Asian American communities. And one of the things I found a little surprising, and I've worked on immigration issues for quite a long time, was that immigrant integration was something that really kind of boiled up to the top. And that's something that we can work on both at the state level and the federal level. So how do we ensure that immigrants who are already in our country and already in our state are being supported to do well within the workforce, to learn English, to succeed economically? So the types of programs that came up were, English as a second language programs, workforce development and job training programs. Healthcare was actually really critical, access to healthcare regardless of immigration status. And you can see access to public benefits is kind of a close second there. So that's something that we, may want to also keep in mind, kind of thinking about the state level, is how can we better integrate immigrant communities into our state. And then a range of other immigration issues and statuses came up. It was clear that for API communities, everything from family unification to, diversity visas, asylum, statuses impacting survivors of domestic violence and trafficking, that all of these are really critical and need to be a part of any package moving forward at the federal level. We also, both in the survey as well as in the conversations, really heard about the importance of ending unjust detention and deportations, and the way that that's really wreaking havoc in certain communities. And this came up particularly for, say, Cambodian and other communities, but kind of across the board. Next slide, please. So, as you can see in terms of the trends, there is a pathway to citizenship that people want to see, but there were really deep concerns about when policies move forward at the federal level as a larger package, that often the issues that API communities care about get traded off. So that includes border security, which, primarily actually impacts Latino communities, but kind of paired with that is the whole national security piece and really kind of throwing of some of the Muslim and South Asian communities under the bus with, really enhanced profiling. And also, there was real concern about family categories, family unification, certain visas that benefit API communities being able to reunite with their families, kind of being traded away as part of the give and take of any immigration reform discussion that's happened over the last couple of decades. And then again, I'll just reiterate it, the immigrant integration and access to healthcare. And so one of the conversations that we had with folks that we interviewed, and there was a space for it in the survey as well, is how do you envision the future in terms of immigration policy? And it was kind of half and half, but folks really did feel like, this is a question to be asked, should we really be moving immigration reform as one massive package? Because what happens then is we pick and choose pieces of it, and, not everybody within Congress is going to be willing to move forward all the different pieces that particularly benefit or support or oppose those things that hurt API communities. So if we kind of move forward things priority by priority, say, legalization, family kind of unification, and those visas separately, would that bring us a better result? That was really a question that folks were grappling with. So that's kind of a focus on the piecemeal effort. And there was also a real feeling that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders were not at the table to really be an advocate for the priorities important to our communities. And it's not because those advocates don't exist and are not out there, but really there wasn't a space that we were able to occupy. And so kind of moving forward, there was a real desire that both, Asian American and Pacific Islander advocates, grassroots groups, as well as others who have a stake in what happens around immigration and API communities, really find a way to ensure that our voices are at the table and that the issues that our communities cared about are prioritized. And then it also came up actually pretty regularly that there's a lot more we can continue to do at the state and local level that we're not done at those levels, even in a state like California. And so that is something, and we're going to hear more about that later today, obviously, but that this is also an area that we should focus on. Next slide, please. I already talked about this, so I'm not going to go into it in any further depth, but, I would just say that people pointed out repeatedly that our immigrant population in this country is really diverse, both including Asian American Pacific Islander communities, but other African immigrants as well, immigrants from all over the world. And changes to our immigration policies are likely going to happen just once in a generation. As we see, it takes quite a long time to move these forward. And so we need to make sure that these are reforms that work for as diverse populations as possible and not just a narrow segment of our immigrant populations. Next slide, please. And then, kind of moving forward, we, at Advancing Justice, as part of our affiliation of different advancing justice organizations across the country, plan to put out this report and really work with our, federal colleagues and our national advocacy groups that we work with to push this vision forward and really make sure API voices are at the table. That's the last slide. That's it. So thank you very much. And I guess we're going to open it up for questions.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so very much. Before we move on to questions, I also want to recognize Helen Lee, who's a commissioner on the California Commission on Asian Pacific Islander American Affairs. Helen's here. Oh, did she step out? Okay. All right. It's all right. I thought I saw her, and then oh, okay. So, all right. Well, when she comes in, we'll. So, all right. So with that, Senator Chow, did you have some questions?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I just want a couple of follow-up questions.
Sure.
We talked about the concept of integration. I want to get your take on what specifically, at the state level, we should kind of target. I think you mentioned a few examples, such as, workforce development, language barrier, and healthcare. Amongst those categories, what specific study shown that we need the most? Or can you kind of break it down a little bit as to what can be done or what should be done at the state level?
Sure. So, I mean, I think what's exciting in California is that we've already done so much, to move this conversation forward. And what's interesting is we've also done a lot specifically around immigration status, right? So those folks who are undocumented, really being able to ensure integration just by providing them things like, say, a driver's license or, access to healthcare for children. I really think for immigrants as a whole, both API and others, that the next phase is really beefing up our programs that are going to support immigrant communities to thrive economically in our state. And so I think some very quick examples of that are English as a second language classes. I think one of the things we've heard over and over again is that funding has gone down way too much, over the last, say, 5, 7, 10 years. There's just not enough classes out there. I think there's also some questions about where classes are being held and are they most accessible to the communities. Workforce development, I think as you all know, WIOA, which was a Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, was renewed, and that monies are coming down to the state and local levels beginning this year, and the state and localities need to have a plan around how they're going to use those resources and which communities are kind of marginalized and need more resources. And immigrants, for example, have not even been identified. So I think that there's some real pinpointing we can do around workforce development. And then I'll just end by saying language access. We've heard this over and over again, particularly from API communities. I think you'll hear later today about driver's license, that it was really hard for API communities to access those programs. So we just need more things translated, better interpretation, better access.
Got it. Similar question for the concept of piecemeal immigration. Obviously, a lot of it has to be done at the federal level, but does your study also indicate whether there's any preferences to what, how the pieces are being divided, or which pieces we should focus in on first? For example, whether it's a family reunification or otherwise. Was there a priority list as to what's being preferred, what's preferred?
Well, we looked at it by percentages of what people said were a priority, and most certainly kind of after a pathway to citizenship, one of the things that came up over and over again were the family categories, and making sure that they were not diminished, that they were expanded, that we dealt with the visa backlogs for a lot of our countries where it's taking people 20, 25 years to, bring over their family members. And, I think in terms of, how it gets sequenced, I don't know that we really asked that question, but I think that there was a strong feeling that, all of these are equally important priorities.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, now that you're here, I just again want to recognize Helen Lee. Welcome. Thank you. We mentioned you earlier, but you had stepped out for a moment. I want to thank you both for your presentations. Actually, I will take this opportunity. I know that Senator Huff has often said he had the most Asian Americans in his Senate district, but I saw he was number 5 on your list. So, okay, just checking for the record. He still has a lot. So, so when we come to our demographics, you mentioned that about 11% of API represents about 11% of the voting population in California. Correct?
Projected for 2016 presidential.
Projected for 2016. I guess we'll find out in November. But yet we represent 15%. Did I get that right? The population
In California.
in California, correct?
Yeah, I personally, yes, that's right.
So we have a gap, right? So we're 15% of the population, but only 11% of the voting population.
Although the 15% represents all Asian Americans, so not necessarily those registered or eligible to register,
Sure.
so it's probably lower.
Okay, but I guess the point is that we're voting below our weight.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. So I think as many of the issues that are being raised, and again, I know you were doing the demographics, and just maybe a question for other panelists later on. What do you have some thoughts about what we can, why, and what we can do about that?
I mean, yeah, like maybe better for other folks later. But I imagine, I mean, there, second to last slide, you did talk about the number of folks who were, the percentage of folks who were eligible to register to vote, and there's definitely a gap between that and those who were actually registered to vote in the last presidential election. So, we're definitely ramping up efforts to, reach out to folks and like encourage people to vote. But again, I think like throughout California, we have to think about like why are people are not registering to vote, even though they're eligible? For some reason, do they not want to vote? Do they not know how to register to vote? Is it because of language access? All these other things that we need to think about. Accessibility. Like, do people have transportation to get to the actual polls, like on the day of? Like, yeah.
Okay. And I guess the other question, and again, actually for either one of our panelists, and again, there may not be data on this, but in the sort of priority list of things that, and again, we have a very diverse community, the API community, but across the board, how important is our immigration policies? Because you talked to groups about immigration policies, but how important are immigration policies in terms of for the API community? How much does it motivate them to do something about it? So there are things we like, there's things we don't like. Is that something that gets people to go out to the polls, or they're like, well, whatever happens, we'll just live with it?
Well, and actually to kind of go back to your previous question, I also think there's a gap between those who are eligible to become citizens and those who are actually becoming citizens. And if we can really, we have, the One California grant program, which has been really great, beginning to close that gap. But I think there's just a lot more we can do even around accessibility so that folks can actually become citizens and then register to vote. In terms of immigration policy, I think we have seen that actually it's a very important issue to API communities. But I also think, based on what I saw in 2013, is I think there is a sense overall that the focus is a pathway to citizenship, which primarily impacts Latino communities. But when you have a deeper conversation about, actually this is about whether you are going to be able to, finish that sponsorship of your daughter to come from your, home country, or we're going to end certain family categories. People care a lot because that's how most APIs have come to this country, other than say employment or other visas. So I think it's critical. It's really about the education that we do within API communities about how immigration policy impacts, them and their families.
So as you mentioned, we've certainly tried to do things here in California, again, around immigration status, and I was proud to author a bill that's actually signed law now that prevents discrimination against people under the Just Under Civil Rights Act, against immigrants, against people based on country of origin, to discriminate against people because they're using a different language. We've, of course, expanded healthcare coverage for children, at least, regardless of documentation status. You mentioned the driver's license bill, which, although I know that one of our challenges is DMV has not been. We've been trying to push DMV to actually expand the number of languages because, in terms of people being able to access that as an opportunity. What should we be doing in terms of reaching out to various API communities around both what we've done in immigration and what still needs to be done? Because clearly part of the issue is political will, and frankly, I think, while on one level, a lot of times immigration seems more of a Latino issue here in the state of California, that community is also appears to be more mobilized to advocate for the immigration issues. And how do we, especially now that API are actually now the largest immigrant group, how do we mobilize our community around immigration issues? So you might send the question back at me later as an elected official, but I'm just curious your take on what we need to do that, not just education, but also then lead to action.
And I think there's definitely panelists on other panels that are going to talk
Well,
about this.
all the future panelists.
Yes,
keep
future
those questions
panelists,
in
that's the
mind
word.
too, right, later on. Yes.
I guess I would just say briefly, having observed some of the statewide policies that have moved forward over the last decade, there have been diverse coalitions pushing those policies. That said, I think again there's a sense that most of these really impact Latino folks and are issues that don't impact the API communities. That's not necessarily true because we've heard that 15% of the population are undocumented. I do think though that there's some specific issues that impact APIs perhaps in a way that they don't impact other communities because, for example, language access we talked about repeatedly, but because of the diversity of languages we speak and the high low English proficiency rates among certain immigrant populations, that when we start talking about language access policies and moving those forward, I think that there are ways that we can engage our communities, both through, the elected officials who represent those communities as well as organizations like ours. But I think really beginning to think moving forward, what are the slices of larger policies or specific policies that impact API communities, and how do we package them in a way that really is meaningful to API communities? Because I don't think it's that folks don't care, as you know. It's that being able to kind of reach them in a meaningful way has been difficult, given how spread out they are and the languages they speak. And I think that's really our strategies and job moving forward.
Well, thank you. I want to thank both of you for your testimony. I will mention that on terms of language access, especially since you mentioned healthcare is very important. When I was chair of the Assembly Health Committee, when I was in the Assembly, I know as we were rolling out the Affordable Care Act, we made a very big push with Covered California in terms of outreach to the API community and languages. I did get some feedback that they said, well, there's so many languages, right? Latino community just gets Spanish. You got so many. And I said, well, you have to do it. We have to figure out how do we address all the various languages, and then also the other thing is it's certainly through my time in the legislature, I know first Speaker Emeritus John Perez and later Speaker Emeritus now Tony Atkins has advocated for funding for language for interpreters or for healthcare, and we were stymied for several years, but finally we now have a budgetary allocation for interpreters to try to do interpreters in healthcare. Certainly as a physician, I know that how do you take care of a patient when a patient can't understand what they're saying and they can't understand what I'm telling them? It's actually more costly for the system, as well as, of course, there's a even greater human cost than just financial as well, but there's also financial costs. So we are trying to make some headway, but I also note that we need to figure out how we can mobilize better as a community around our priorities, and our diversity is part of the challenge in that mobilization, but hopefully we can, again, mobilize people for our common goals. So again, thank you both for your presentations, and I think some of the same questions may come back around for our future presenters, subsequent presenters as well, so thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, so the next panel is on immigrant rights and integration, and we have Carlos Amador, lead organizer of California Immigrant Policy Center, Amy Yu, a member of Uplift and Dreamer, Jenny Xian, I hope I got that right, the Immigrant Rights Program Director at Korean Resource Center, and Anthony Ng, policy advocate, immigrant rights, Asian Americans Advancing Justice. So if you're here, please come up to the to the desk here. I want to thank you all. I think we're going to start with Carlos Amador. And so I think we're going to ask you if you can do your presentation in 5 to 7 minutes so we can leave time for questions. So welcome. So Mr. Amador.
Yeah, this chair is like weird. It should be fine. Hi, thank you for having us and having me. My name is Carlos Amador with the California Immigrant Policy Center. The California Immigrant Policy Center is a statewide policy advocacy organization. We've been around for 20 years, and we have offices in Oakland, Sacramento, as well as Los Angeles. So, but obviously we work across the state, both from San Diego to the Bay Area, Sacramento, and all in between as well. I think I need to give like notice, right, for switching, or yeah, okay, great. And so again, and I'll try to skim through um, the PowerPoint quickly. And it's someone said like someone was keeping time. Is that right? Okay. So obviously we engage on the legislative and budget advocacy. Many of a big chunk of our focus is on healthcare accessibility for immigrant communities, as well as fighting detention and deportation, and also fighting for immigrant worker rights. So we work throughout, including coalition engagement, or engaging in regional coalitions, or issue-based coalitions, whether it's like the Health for All coalition, or the Trust Act coalition, among others. We really are driven by the input and the leadership of immigrant rights leaders and immigrant leaders specifically across the state. And besides the advocacy, we also provide reports, tools, technical tools, and trainings to community-based organizations and coalitions. You can next. So just to share a little bit in regards to some of the 2016 efforts and work. As you all probably know, SB 10 was signed into law this year, which essentially started a mechanism to apply or submit a request for the 1332 waiver of the ACA to the federal government. So at the end of last month, on September 30th, the Board of Cover California submitted officially this request, this waiver request to the federal government. And so many organizations, whether it's local, state, and national organizations, are making the advocacy push to the federal government to be able to obtain this federal waiver in order to open up the doors for undocumented immigrants to be able to access the Cover California marketplace. So we hope to have a response from the federal government, from the Obama administration, in the months to come. And we're going to be doing everything in our capacity to be able to push that forward. Also, just to highlight some of the Health for Kids, for All Kids implementation. As of today, many of the kids were in the restricted Medi-Cal program. 98% of those kids have been transitioned into the full scope Medi-Cal program. So many, a lot of this work has been led by the California Immigrant Healthcare Network, and essentially at the same time, new kids and youth have been added to the medical system. About 31,300 children and youth have been added as well, and all of this puts it at a total of 119,400 children and youth that are now benefited from full scope medical as well. And just to highlight some of the not so exciting news is that even though we pushed hard and fought to try to get coverage or accessibility to the California Food and Assistance Program, the CalFresh program, through AB 1770, it was vetoed by the governor, and so this bill, this bill would have provided access to otherwise eligible, lawfully present members of our community to this very needed service. So we will continue to fight and ensure that these families facing severe economic challenges are given the opportunity for economic mobility through this program in the year to come. And just quickly also to highlight the efforts to expand the new state earned income tax credit to also working immigrant families who file taxes through an ITIN number. Unfortunately, undocumented immigrants, even though they file taxes with the state government, are excluded from this new program, this new tax credit. So we have been making efforts to try to make sure that they are included, given that they are contributing to the economy and society. And so even though we weren't able to succeed on this today, and this year we will be able to continue moving forward. Also, just as another highlight and an important success this year, the Truth Act, which was authored by Assemblymember Bontam, we're really appreciative and applaud his leadership on authoring this bill. And through the efforts of the Trust Act Coalition, we were able to win a signature on this legislation, essentially making the Know Your Rights information for many immigrants who are stuck in the criminal justice system and in danger of getting transferred over to ICE through this ICE notification programs. We wanted to make sure that through the Truth Act they will be able to receive this Know Your Rights information, and also begin to shine some light on how local law enforcement and ICE collaborate through these deportation programs. We truly believe that California can do much more, right, and trying to curb and limit this ICE police collaboration that is so detrimental to our families and our communities across the state. This harsh deportation stems from the entangling of the ICE and police. And as we know, ICE is an unaccountable rogue organization and agency that stops at nothing to in order to separate our families and our communities. So we will continue to fight forward and move forward to try to create more awareness of the Truth Act, obviously, but also continue coming back to the state legislature to ensure that more protections and this disentanglement between the two agencies happens. We can go to the next one. So just to talk briefly about One California, and also 1 minute. I also wanted to acknowledge the leadership of the API Legislative Caucus as well as the Latino Caucus for helping us push forward the One California program. We were able to double the amount of money that we received from $15 million last year and the first year that it was implemented to $30 million this year. One quick thing to highlight here is that even though it has been a successful program, there has been also challenges in regards to some of the education and outreach to API communities, given that the communities are very diverse and there needs to be tailored programs or models to be able to do the outreach to them. So the Department of Social Services is looking into pilot programs, pilot models to be able to create better access to those communities. I'll try to skip through some of this just to get into a little bit of like next year. So one quick thing to highlight also in regards to driver's license, and I know some of my other colleagues will be talking about it, but this year, given we're almost at the 2-year mark of the implementation of the driver's license program, we have 778,000 driver's license issued to undocumented immigrants in the state. So that's a really remarkable number. At the same time, it's a mixed result, given that some of the most disadvantaged community members have been the Asian Pacific Islander immigrants as well as African immigrants, with some of the limitations and barriers that they have faced in trying to prove their own identifications or language access, or even just the culture and practices of DMV staff. So I know some of my colleagues will go more into detail into that, but wanted to highlight that as well. And you can go to the next one too. And the next one. One more. Thank you. And so we will continue to fight for the ending detention and deportations across the state, whether it's through legislative or local power building efforts. We will continue to see what other economic mobility programs we can access as well and lift, whether it's through the earned income tax credit, making it accessible to undocumented immigrants as well, or whether it's through the Workforce Innovative and Opportunity Act, which I know Reshma raised earlier, but by making sure that those models and those programs are available also for limited English proficiency communities as well. So I'll leave it at that since we are short on time, but maybe we can engage more during the question and answer. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so very much, Amador. Right, Ms. Yu.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Amy, and I'm here on behalf of Uplift. which is a community organization that advocates for undocumented API rights and also other immigrant rights. So I didn't prepare a presentation or anything. I just wanted to share some of my own personal experiences as an undocumented Chinese American living here in Monterey Park. So I'm currently 22 years old, and I came here to Monterey Park from Hong Kong in 2001 when I was 7 years old with my family, and I've lived in Monterey Park since. I went to Mark Keppel High School, and I attended University of California, Irvine. I graduated this past year, and now I'm attending UC Irvine School of Law. And so a little bit about while I was growing up as an undocumented immigrant. So when I went to Mark Keppel High, I graduated 2012, and that was the year I think the California DREAM Act, the second part, was implemented, and none of the counselors and the teachers or staff or teachers knew about the DREAM Act, so they weren't aware of the resources that were available for undocumented students, and there wasn't even a lot of knowledge of, who undocumented people are, or who dreamers were, or anything really about immigration policies. So, but I knew that, undocumented students existed because I actually ran into an old high school friend who actually told me about his status a few years ago, and I didn't realize that there were so many of us until learning about all the statistics that Asian Americans Advancing Justice showed us earlier, but there's just a really lack of knowledge about these about legal resources, services that undocumented immigrants should have access to, and it's not only for students though, because I feel like whenever we talk about immigration policies, it's really DACA-centric and really Dreamer-centric, and that's obviously not the only population who are undocumented, right? I'm not sure about the statistics for, how many people, workers, mothers, parents are undocumented, but my mom is also undocumented, and she's an undocumented worker. She used to work at a beauty salon, and she would be subject to exploitation, like not being paid full wages, not receiving her back pay, not receiving sick days, so she had to go to work while sick. So there's a lot of problems, I guess, that still needs to be addressed, being an undocumented student, worker, parent, and I think there's also not been a lot of outreach to these communities, but I mean, I don't really blame organizations or nonprofits for not being able to provide services or resources, because from what my mom tells me, she doesn't really trust either law enforcement or third-party agencies coming in to, I guess, talk about or have conversations with parents who have no status. So my mom, she doesn't actually talk about her status. Like, only when I actually bring it up to her, when I have problems, that's when we actually talk about it. And I don't really know why or where her lack of trust stems from, but it could be because, as Chinese Americans, she was born in China, and she was heavily influenced by the communist government from China, and so that may be one reason why she and a lot of my Chinese relatives don't really trust law enforcement. But I also want to stress that because the term AAPI or ANHPI is really broad, it doesn't really cover the scope of issues that, as an undocumented East Asian American face. Well, it doesn't include a lot of the narratives that are left out in the mainstream immigrant narrative, because I can only speak for myself as an East Asian, but issues like deportations affect a lot of other Asians, like Southeast Asians and South Asians, who have a darker skin color and who are not really, who are more subject to racial profiling. Because like me, I can drive in the streets and I'm not scared of police officers pulling me over and checking my ID and then handing me over to ICE, and I don't think I would have any future problems with that. But for South Asians, people who have darker skin, they may have that problem. I also know a lot of friends who have families who've been deported, and that issue is also never addressed because a lot of Asian American communities don't really have the resources to ask for legal services, which are often low cost, because a lot of us are also low income. Even though we live in the San Gabriel Valley, a lot of the East Asians here are known to be privileged or wealthy or living in a middle class household, like in Arcadia. But a lot of us are actually also low income workers. So I guess the most important thing that I just wanted to stress was that for immigration policies, we should really be inclusive of not just students, dreamers, but also parents and workers, non-traditional families, including LGBTQ people, who often don't fit into the categories of what makes a good immigrant or a bad immigrant. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yu. Ms. Yuan.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator Pan and the State Select Committee on API Affairs for taking a closer look into the issues in our country across the state. And thank you so much, Amy, for sharing your story and being so brave. I think Amy really highlighted many of the aspects that our undocumented youth face, and they're such great arbiters of truth and what their parents go through. And a lot of times, our parents aren't able to come and speak at these hearings, but I think that one of the questions you ask is, how do we mobilize our undocumented immigrants? How do we mobilize immigrants? It's through investment in youth. I know that Uplift is one of the organizing groups that organizes youth who speak to one another and learn about the plight of undocumented youth. So I just wanted to highlight that aspect. But again, my name is Jenny Sun. I'm the Immigrant Rights Project Director at the Korean Resource Center. Our organization is a nonprofit grassroots organization founded in 1983. We serve to empower low-income immigrants through a holistic model that combines education, social services, and culture with community advocacy and organizing. Now today, KRC has a strong immigrant rights program directly serving undocumented Korean immigrants in Los Angeles and Orange County. Our program includes community education, direct services for naturalization, DACA, California DREAM Act, AB 540, access to health care, affordable housing, financial empowerment, and issues that come up among community members. So undocumented Californians today are able to access certain services such as in-state tuition, Cal Grants, and obtain driver's license, and recently provide health care for children. There's also the $30 million investment for immigration services. In light of Congress's failure to pass any meaningful comprehensive immigration reform, this effort in California is welcome and applauded. But we have to recognize that access to these services are not always fairly extended to the API community. Now, in my work as the API director at KRC, I'm confronted each and every day with painful stories from the undocumented Korean community. Day in and day out, I speak to mothers, fathers, students, and young adults who feel that they are voiceless. That's why I came today in an effort to amplify these voices. So to give you a little bit of background, I know that we had a whole panel for data, so I'll be very brief. There's about 230,000 South Korean undocumented immigrants living in the United States, and a staggering number of undocumented Koreans live in California. So roughly one out of 7 Korean immigrants are estimated to be undocumented. Now, DACA statistics show that South Koreans are the 5th highest applicants. However, those numbers still are very low, only accounting for less than 25% of eligible DACA recipients. Given these numbers, it's critical for California to recognize the specific challenges that undocumented APIs face. I think the easiest way to convey these issues are through stories. And I'll just run through a couple of quick stories. One is access to education. And when we talk about access to education, we often think of colleges. But just in the 4 years that I've been at the Korean Resource Center, I've seen dozens of cases of elementary students being turned away at the elementary level. Now, the Kim family, they were one of the few families who wanted to step forward and fight the school when their daughter Emily was turned away from matriculating into 3rd grade. So we advocated, we met with the principal explaining clearly the Supreme Court ruling of Plyer versus Doe, which is a historic ruling, and as an educator, we thought that they would understand, but they didn't understand the ruling. They didn't understand that Emily had a right to go to this school. And during this meeting, the principal kept on repeating that Emily was illegal and had no business being in public school, and that she needed to come back with her green card in order to go to school. So through that, I really saw that it's so very challenging for those who do not speak the language, who are young and are undocumented. So even though we were able to succeed in getting Emily to matriculate, they weren't able to stay in that school for too long because of, I guess, harassment, and they didn't feel very welcome, so they left. That's a very sad story, and a sad story that we hear often. And in the same way, in-state tuition, while it's been maybe 15 years since it has been in existence, it is not equally accessible to API students. They're always asked to bring their status, showing what student visa they have, and it's just a really ugly process, and it really drives our undocumented youth deeper into the shadows. And for those who make the decision to go to college, to go to community college, to perhaps get a AA degree or something, when they're faced with the no, they no longer go back there. And so we're afraid that we're losing people trying to take advantage of opportunities, and they're losing that. And lastly, with AB 60, I know you heard a lot about the problems and issues facing AB 60. It's been a long road. I know that everybody on this panel has heard and seen. And just to highlight what the problem is, we've been helping a 32-year-old undocumented gentleman named Matt. He speaks perfect English. He came here when he was 3 years old, and he's been trying to get his driver's license so that he could drive, and we had to advocate with the DMV office in Sacramento and got him through to applying. And then at a secondary review, the officers saw his documents, that this was not enough. You need to bring your mother. So immediately he was stunned at the request to bring his mother, and we did get it resolved. But if somebody that speaks perfect English can't communicate, can't get through to the DMV officers, and if those regulations aren't followed by the DMV officers, it's really a disservice to the community. So to conclude, the reason why I'm here is that we need to recognize that access is not fair and has not been fair. So in order for the APIs not to be forgotten, further driven into the shadows, in California, we need to think broadly and do all immigrant justice for what's the use of legislation if it doesn't work for all people. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Sion. Finally, we have Mr. Ng. Welcome.
Honorable committee members, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to testify at today's hearing. My name is Anthony Nong. I am the Immigrant Rights Policy Advocate at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Cell A. As an immigrant rights advocate and an undocumented person, it is an honor to be able to share the needs and perspective of a long-standing and growing community in California with this committee. California is home to the largest Asian American population and the second largest NHPI population in the country. We are the home to the largest undocumented Asian American population in the nation, which exceeds the combined undocumented Asian American population living in the states of New York, New Jersey, and Texas. The A and HPI communities are not new to California. We have a long history of being in California. The first recorded Filipino in California landed in Morro Bay in 1587. The first wave of Chinese immigration to California happened in 1848 during the Gold Rush, and the first wave of NHPI immigration to California happened after World War II. California today is where the rest of the nation is heading and needs to be at. From a dark past of passing Prop 187 to passing the most progressive immigrant rights legislation and policies in the country in the last decade, California continues to embody what it means to use our difference as a point of strength and unity. Our state and many of our cities and counties have shown what it means to integrate and incorporate immigrants into our communities. We have welcomed immigrants of all walks in life, from ensuring that immigrants have access to safety net program, that immigrant workers are protected from exploitation and employer abuse, from providing immigrant students, regardless of their immigration status, access to higher education, to expanding healthcare to as many immigrants as possible. Our state has passed laws and policies that welcome immigrants from the Truth Act to One California. Like many immigrant communities, API communities are stakeholders in any immigration issues, from access to information about programs, creation of new programs that integrate immigrants into our state and into their local communities, to public benefits, and disentanglement of local law enforcement and ICE. API immigrants are impacted by these issues on a daily basis. When our states ensures that all immigrants are protected from employer abuse, have the same rights as everyone else, and are able to earn a livable wage, API immigrants and families are able to thrive. Although we are in a better place today, where all Californians have access to driver's license, undocumented children have access to full scope Medi-Cal, domestic workers are given the right that they deserve, and where the state is investing in our immigrant communities by having a director of immigrant integration and providing resources for naturalization and other immigration services, we still have our challenges to ensure that we are responsive to the needs of all immigrant communities. We need to approach immigrant integration from a holistic perspective of policymaking and effective implementation to the array of issues that create barriers for optimal implementation of immigrant integration plans. That can look like in many ways, from ensuring that our policymakers are aware of the diverse realities and experiences of the immigrant communities to providing leadership in immigration issues. This starts in ensuring that our community's reality is reflected in the way our state collects data, which is why it is important for us to continue our efforts to ensure that this aggregate data and culturally competent information is available to policymakers, advocates, and community members. Our state did exactly that by passing AB 1726. With this aggregate data, we are able to create policies and laws that reflect the needs of our community. Take AB 60, for example, a landmark legislation that restored the ability of undocumented Californians to drive in our state because we knew it was a need in the community, given the different data presented around car impoundments and the number of undocumented Californians. However, we should ensure that the information we're utilizing are culturally competent to reflect the diverse realities of immigrant communities. We saw this as a clear challenge in the implementation of AB 60 in the API community. Community members were being told that AB 60 was not for them because they do not fit the stereotype of what an undocumented Californian looks like. In tandem, that the process itself seemed more difficult for API communities compared to other communities. Majority of API community members who applied for AB 60 were being automatically referred to secondary review due to having difficulties in obtaining documents necessary to go through AB 60's primary process. The impact this had in the API community is profound, where many community members have felt discouraged to continue the application or even initiate the application because of the stories they've heard from family members and friends about their experience applying for AB 60. Although we have been working with the DMV and our partners to continually address these issues, there is more work that needs to be done to ensure that API community members feel empowered to seize an opportunity that will help integrate them more into our communities. We are glad to hear from the DMV that they are making proposed changes to AB 60 as it relates to language access and streamlining secondary review. Lastly, we cannot forget that many immigrant communities come from countries where the fear of government is real and that those fears are not left behind in our home countries. This is why it is critical to be informed of the realities that immigrants the realities immigrant communities face as we continue moving a pro-immigrant agenda forward in our state. When community members perceive local law enforcement as immigration agents, they will continue to associate that fear with any entity related to our governments in the state and local level, which impacts how much immigrants are accessing programs and agencies. This is the reality that we see in the API community, where immigrants are not accessing services due to this fear. Our challenge as a state moving forward is to dismantle this fear and ensure that our communities have access to these critical programs. We must continue to remember that as we create, pass, and implement new policies and state laws, that the immigrant community is diverse, that we must have a culturally competent strategy, since a one-size-fits-all mentality will be a disservice to the diverse immigrant community who call California home. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so very much. And again, I want to thank Ms. Stu for sharing your personal story. It's very courageous of you. Senator Chow, did you have any questions for the panel?
Yeah, I also want to echo your comment. I want to also extend my invitation to Ms. Yu, and if there's anything that my office can help with, I know you live in my district, so please reach out to us. And I do have 2 staff members in the back. Feel free to contact us as to how we can actually improve the system. You know, it's one thing to say that we have passed legislation, but yet, you know, to the extent that agencies are not complying with the legislation, for example, then it's our responsibility to, monitor their situation and kind of make corrections as appropriately. So I do invite all of you to contact my office if you live in my district, and also Dr. Pan's office. And if there's anything that we can help with, again, thank you for sharing your personal stories. I did have a question for Mr. Amador, and I did notice that on one of the slides you mentioned about the California the gang database. So with respect to that particular situation, what is there a position that you're taking to improve the transparency of that database at all?
Yeah, so we were supportive of the campaign to pass the Cal Gang Database Transparency Bill, and actually the bill was part of our Immigrant Day platform. We have Immigrant Day, Lobby Day every year during May, around the May time, and so we believe strongly that having this transparency and actually moving forward to ensure that people are not stuck in this racist system that essentially continues to perpetually incarcerate or put labels on our community members. That also impacts immigrant communities as well. There's some of the stories that we were actually able to raise in many of the legislative visits that we did, and also campaign events, is that for some of the folks or undocumented members that were trying to apply even for DACA, right, this federal program, they found out in that moment that they were being denied DACA because they were considered to be part of this gang database that they had no idea they were part of. So this has obviously those consequences. It also has consequences in the forms of making them priority for deportation as well, or the federal government using this label as part of consideration for priority of deportation as well. So we feel strongly and are really excited that the bill got signed. And I think helped many organizations that pushed it forward. And we want to make sure that for folks that don't know at this time that they're part of that system, for them to be able to be pulled out, and for folks that are going to be added to it, to ensure that there's this appeal process, so they can be able to essentially abstain or prevent from being added to it. And it obviously has tremendous consequences on people that they don't even know they're part of it, including many children as well that get added to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just a few questions. So first of all, I just want to say that I know we talked a bit about this subject of this hearing is immigration, and we talked about it, how it's perceived as more of a Latino issue. But I think that in terms of moving forward, clearly this is an opportunity for alliance, which we've been certainly working together with the Latino Caucus and the API Caucus on these particular issues, and that this is not a competition between us, but really it's an opportunity for us to come together and unify around this very important issue around immigration. Now, I know this has come up in both Ms. Yu's testimony and No was mentioned as well. How do we address the and it's a huge challenge, the trust issue, right? So what happens is that you may have had an experience back before you immigrated with government officials, depending on the nature of the situation. You come to this country, you may be worried about being deported if you get. And at the same time, we're trying to figure out how to get services. People are getting exploited because of that, right? If you tell your employer, well, where's my back pay? They said, well, I can. They may not even have to explicitly say it. They sort of hint that they can get you in trouble. What can we do? And obviously, we're elected officials here, so I guess we're part of government. But what can we try to do? What are some? Have there been effective interventions, or how do we reach out to a community that, probably for good reason, oftentimes, may not want to hear from us, or may be very nervous when we try to reach out? What are some approaches we can take to try to address some of those barriers so that we can actually help people?
I think from my experience, I do community organizing also in Orange County, well, specifically in Santa Ana. And for our immigrant rights groups, when we do services, provide services for undocumented immigrants, we usually have it in the form of a community event, and we invite family members to participate, not just those who are receiving the services. So if they would come with somebody they trust, or if they know people who are there and are attending, they will more likely show up. But also, it's also a chance for us to foster, community relationships and build bonds with each other, and also because collaborations also helps us to get to know each other better and try to leave behind the stereotypes that we have formed about each other based on, what we've heard in the news. I think that's one thing that's worked for us.
And I think in addition to that, ensuring that agencies are safe zones for immigrants, right, where we know like ICE isn't necessarily present there. I think just hearing stories from our partners in San Diego where you can see Border Patrol in the DMV, like outside the DMV. So a lot of folks are like worried, why is Border Patrol here? Like I think even the presence of a DHS like patrol outside any agencies, or if you're building buildings that are near kind of immigration detention centers and whatnot, I think that kind of scares people off from utilizing services, as well as ensuring, right, that like our agency staff are culturally competent and are able to utilize right language and not call people illegal or tell them, oh, you don't qualify for this program because you don't look like an undocumented person.
And if I could just
please.
add, also the need to continue doing education with the ethnic media as well. Oftentimes, like many of the ethnic media channels, or as I know the experience through the Drive California coalition work on the implementation of AB 60, some of the channels are not very receptive to like the immigrant story or the immigrant community's experiences, or have like an anti-immigrant feel as well. So all of that also impacts the stories that many of the community members receive. So if to whatever extent you all can do some of the help support some of the education with many of the media outlets on what the immigrant community experiences and the importance of doing accurate and responsible coverage of many of these issues. I think that could help also create more awareness and welcoming, I guess, experience or feeling towards some of these programs as well.
And I think in addition, just kind of recalling the AB 60 forum we had with Assemblymember Chow's office maybe a year and a half ago, where I think a lot of the community members attended felt unsafe having media there, and his staff took care of ensuring that like no pictures were taken. I think that creates a very welcoming environment for immigrant communities, in particular undocumented folks who are trying to access AB 60.
And then the other question I have in terms of course, people trying to get their legal rights, and I'll tell you, I'm not an attorney, even as someone who is a elected official, as a professional, highly educated. Believe me, sometimes even our legal system is challenging enough for someone like myself. I can imagine someone who doesn't understand the language, and we've heard a little touch on that, how sometimes people even get exploited by our legal system, and people may have had experiences not only in this country but back home about what can we do as policymakers to address. I think people try to simplify things or to make people be more willing to actually access the legal system in their favor, where it can be just scary to have the legal system touch you at all in your work, whether you're a immigrant business owner or you're an immigrant. When you say the word lawyer, does that conjure fear, or does that conjure someone that is going to advocate for you? Is that something I'm off base on in the community, or how do people feel about our legal system and the ability to actually apply our legal system to help them?
To speak to that really quickly is we've been hearing stories, and I know that it's across different communities, is if you make a worker's claim, then you get picked up by ICE very shortly. And if you hear one story, you're not going to ever want to make a complaint about not getting your back wages. Those are just the examples. Even like going to pay a traffic ticket, people don't want to go to court to pay their traffic tickets. So even this time, for AB 60, one of the things that we suggest and recommend is pay your traffic tickets before you apply for it. And that was one of the reasons why this gentleman didn't apply so far, is because I'm scared to go to the courthouse to pay my ticket. So this fear, I think, is very deep set. There needs to be a lot of education, community outreach, and speaking out from the California legislature, seeing people say, we want you to apply for AB 60. This is a good program. I know Judy Chu has been outspoken and she says very powerfully, be brave, apply for this program. And I think that meant the world to a lot of people to hear that from a congressperson.
So I think just to also add is obviously that reassurance, right? And then some of those programs, like the Medi-Cal program, like making sure that, or informing the community members that their information is confidential and won't be shared with other federal agencies, right? But at the same time, in spaces or agencies where that information is shared, how do we change those systems, right? One of them is the AB 60 program, right? Like the DMV does provide access to ICE agents for the purposes of law enforcement, so and investigation. So how do we make sure, or are there ways that we can prevent from that to happen? So we ensure that we can guarantee to people that they won't be found or looked after by ICE when they apply for the AB 60 license. And at the same time, right, like how do we disentangle the collaboration between police and ICE, so we can reassure and be guaranteed to the community that if they call the police, they won't be turned over to ICE, they won't be reported to ICE. And so I think changing those systems will be able to make the community feel more comfortable trusting the legal system as well.
And I think it's very critical to have information that's culturally competent. And I think when we say that, people just automatically thinking just translating things directly, right? And I think it's more beyond that. It's making it relevant to the community members. Like certain terms don't exist in certain API languages, and how to make sure that the information that you're providing community members is not overwhelming, that it's actually understandable, and that they're able to actually take action with the information that they're able to get.
Well, I'm hoping that, and certainly our administrative agencies like DMV when it comes to driver's license, but I also wonder about our judicial system, what we can do with our judicial system to have them figure out how they can be more, I guess, understandable even to immigrant populations and more welcoming. You go to a courthouse, and to be able to secure your rights. that courthouse should not be a place of fear, and what can the judiciary perhaps help out in that regards as well. Certainly, I want to follow up with what Senator Chow said in terms of implementation. I certainly, in my time in the legislature, I recognize that we can pass really great legislation and have it signed by the governor, but if we don't follow through on the implementation, and if I can just briefly share a little story of my own, the state had passed a policy saying that if you're a DACA, you actually qualified for full scope Medi-Cal, and I started hearing from folks in my county that the county eligibility workers were actually turning them away. And it turned out that the Department of Healthcare Services had not actually sent any notices to the counties saying that they were eligible, number one. Number two, the very computer system that determined eligibility actually, for DACA, actually said they were not eligible. So when the county worker put in the system, it actually said that they were not eligible. You actually had to do a workaround. They hadn't programmed the computer. So not surprisingly, the county workers were turning people away. And when you got turned away once, you're rarely likely to go back. And so we actually ended up, worked with the county welfare directors, raised that issue. We got Department of Healthcare Service to immediately send out a notice to the counties saying that they were, and including the workaround they had to do on the computer, that if the computer says no, not eligible, actually you need to do the workaround, that you don't just accept that, right? So this is the county policy. But surprisingly, even though we had passed it, I thought it was already law, no problem. This was an implementation issue. So fortunately and unfortunately, our staffs are fairly limited. We count on all of you in the audience and advocacy groups to tell us when these things are happening so we can follow through and correct these. So certainly appreciate your vigilance and your advocacy. So again, thank you so much for presenting and sharing your stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, our next panel is the panel on equity in the API community, and we have Stuart Koh, President and Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Los Angeles, Elisa Tulua, Chief Operating Officer of Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, and Kalina Soriano, Executive Director, Filipino Workers Center of Southern California. Welcome. And we'll, again, we'll ask you to present for approximately about 7 minutes each, and then so we'll have time for Q&A. And thank you so much for being here. So I think we'll start with Mr. Koh. Hello, good seeing you again. Welcome.
Well, good afternoon.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Senator Pan, Assemblyman Chow, thank you very much for holding this information hearing. And I'll be speaking about equity, and in particular, I'll focus on higher education, workers' rights, as well as voting rights and empowerment. And I'm glad to be joined by two wonderful leaders in our community as well. I wanted to start off with I think you've had a few speakers from my organization, our organization, but Advancing Justice LA is the nation's largest civil rights legal organization in the nation. We have over 100 staff, well over 600 volunteers. We work with our Advancing Justice ALC office in the Bay Area, and we have a wonderful lead in our Sacramento Advancing Justice California office, Andrew Medina, who's here. And he's worked with the API caucus for a number of years. So thank you for sharing him with us. We do, as you know, a lot of statewide work. We're in Sacramento, but we have a very strong base in Southern California in particular. And so it's nice to be at the Rosemead City Council, because in the back here we have, or next to us, we have a number of programs at the Rosemead Library. We have ESL and citizenship clinics throughout the San Gabriel Valley, but we oftentimes come here. We do workers' rights clinics. We work with students and parents in 3 Alhambra Unified School District High Schools, Alhambra, Mark Keppel, and San Gabriel. And in the coming election, we have, I'll talk more about our campaign on Your Vote Matters at the end. We're working with 20 groups, including the groups up here, and to make about 70,000 calls in 17 Asian languages to get out the vote for this November. We want to thank Senator Pan for his wonderful co-authoring of Senate Bill 1050, and we're very much looking forward to implement that. Actually, we had a meeting with some of the UC representatives yesterday. We've been meeting with San Gabriel Valley school districts officials, and so we really want to make sure that Senate Bill 1050 is implemented well. And as you know, Senator Pan, the 4 key provisions in that are $200 million for college readiness. Secondly, expanding 2,500 slots in the UCs, making sure that more students who are low-income English language learners and foster care youth have a chance, eligible students have a real chance to get into the UCs. And obviously, we're very much for Cal States and community colleges as well. And then $20 million for retention and success programs. So we see that especially in the Chinese American community, there's a tremendous support for expanding UC and Cal State enrollment. So we'd love to continue working with you on that. On workers' rights, we have a series of cases where we've seen the importance of enforcement in terms of minimum wage, workers' rights, and I know Aki will be speaking about that in their community, but we have many cases of truck drivers, of restaurant workers, of tour guides, Chinese and Filipinos and Latinos who really don't have that enforcement. So we are appreciative of Assembly Bill 2437 with Phil Ting that will require nail salons and other establishments to explain applicable wage and labor laws. And we think that will be very important. We are kicking off a monthly series of workers' rights clinics in the San Gabriel Valley, so we look forward to working with Assemblyman Chow on that. Just on voting rights, we are suing the city of Fullerton for not having district-based elections. They have an at-large system, and since 2002, 3 Asian Americans have run and none have won. And we believe that the at-large system dilutes the votes of Asian Americans, who are over 20% of that community. The last thing I wanted to talk about is our voting empowerment campaign. We see it as 4 interrelated campaigns. One is citizenship. There are hundreds of thousands of Asian Americans in the state who are not yet citizens. And as you know, 2/3 of Asian Americans are foreign-born. So unless we have really good citizenship campaigns, people won't be eligible to vote. So we have a huge campaign. We've worked very closely with the Asian media, some of whom are here, and they've been great. In fact, at our office, we're directly funding about 20 groups, but we've seen a doubling in the citizenship applicants in just the last half year. On voter registration, we're picking that up too. We really encourage the state legislature to make it easier to have citizens to register to vote. So the motor voter bills, the moving towards same-day voter registration, eliminating the barriers will really help. And as I said, we're really working on Get Out the Vote. We're expecting to make 70,000 calls with about 20 of our partners this in the next few weeks. And the last thing I'll just mention is we're doing poll monitoring in over 100 sites because we found that while we have bilingual ballots, sometimes at certain sites the poll sites don't have the bilingual help. As you know, we had helped to push forward a bill that allowed permanent residents to be poll site helpers, but we still need to make sure that the materials are available, so we're inspecting over 100 sites this coming November 8th. Thank you again, and we look forward to any questions and fully wanting to continue working with you on these issues.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Quote. Before we move on, I also want to recognize the step out Paul Chang, who's the regional advisor of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. So I think he just stepped out. All right, that's my timing. Okay. Well, welcome, and so Ms. Tulua, right? Thank you. Thank you for
Hi.
being here.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share a little bit about our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities here in California. It's an honor. My name is Alisi Tulua, and I am Chief Operating Officer at Empowering Pacific Islander Communities. Our mission is to promote social justice by engaging Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders through advocacy, research, and leadership development. And this is a fact you probably already know, but California holds the largest population of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders outside of the state of Hawaii. And that includes Samoan, Chamorro, Guamanian communities, Tongans, and the fastest growing NHPI group, the Fijians. NHPI population grew about 29% between 2000 and 2010, which is second only to the Asian American community and slightly above that of the Latinos. Eliminate the that I said there. Sorry about that. And the fastest growing of our community is Fijian community, which is largely around Santa Rosa up north and in Sacramento area. The NHPI population is composed of proportionately more youth than any other racial group. About 1 in 3 of NHPI are youth under the age of 18. So we have a very young population. The median age is 28, which is the lowest among racial groups except that of Latinos, and far below the state average of 35. And about 13% are college-age youth, a rate that's identical to Latinos and high among racial groups. So when I was asked to speak to the issues of our community, I was asked, what are the issues that prevent success for your communities? And the two big things that came to mind for me were education and health, which are two issues that our communities are working on. And I shared some of our the age of our population because education is very important to our community and for our community to thrive because we have very large young populations. So according to 2006-2010 American Community Survey, only 19% of NHPIs are over the age of 25 have a bachelor's degree. This is compared to 30% of the total population. But when you look more closely at the data, because census disaggregates more specifically, you will see that only 11% of Samoans, 12% of Fijians, and 15% of Tongans over the age of 25 have a bachelor's degree. In fact, recent University of California data showed that while overall enrollment in 2005-2016 increased by 10,000, the enrollment for NHPIs decreased. So our community's ability to pursue and succeed in higher education hinges on our families' abilities to thrive. And one of the biggest barriers to our family's success is health, which has become a burden, not just financially, but also overall in the community. And this is just due to lack of access due to education, coverage, and affordability. 17% of NHPIs don't have health insurance, a rate slightly lower than average. But when you look more closely at the data, you will see that 30% of Tongan Americans don't have health insurance, and that's a rate higher than any other racial group. And I share all these numbers, and I thank you. You were both at our launch of our California Demographics Report. All of these numbers are in there, but I share that because disaggregating data is really important to our community's ability to advocate and also create solutions. When you think about the data that comes from the Tongan community, you think about the population that's large in the Hawthorne-Inglewood area. When you think about the Fijian community, you think about Northern California. And you think about the Samoan community, it's the South Bay. And so, although our work is really looking at the overall NHPI population, creating solutions, we need to look at where the data is coming from and where we need to target our work. So if we're looking to bring in more Fijian American students to our leadership development program, we need to look at, targeting our outreach to the population up north, and what are some of the barriers in Santa Rosa that we can help remove. And so data is really important to our community. And California has become a model in pursuing that. In fact, when AB 1088 passed in 2010, Utah and Oregon populations of NHPIs actually took that example and pursued for data disaggregation at their state levels. And so you see the work that we do here in California for our small yet fast-growing population really has impact across our communities across the state. And so with that, I just want to say thank you to both of you for your continued support and continuing to listen to our community's voices, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Finally, we have Ms. Soriano. Welcome.
I think it's on. Oh, is it on? Okay, great. Hi, how are you doing? Good afternoon. So thank you for having me here, and I'm the Executive Director of the Filipino Workers Center, but also on the steering committee for the California Domestic Worker Coalition. And as you all know, NHPI workers are a vital part of our economy here in California, and they play a lot of different roles. We play a lot of different roles, of course, in science, technology, engineering, and the STEM mathematics. We have a high representation, but we also have overrepresentation and significant numbers in low-wage industries as well. So from nail salons to garment manufacturing to taxi drivers, also to home care and other domestic work, as well as cashiers. We have large numbers of our community in these industries. And the number of low-income Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders in low-income jobs has grown faster than any other racial group from 2006 to 2012. So we're feeling the impacts of that in our communities. We've been making a lot of strides, in California as we begin to strengthen minimum wage, so that people who are working can afford to live and support their families. Also, in securing safety nets, and also passing laws that are protecting workers' rights. Both we have SB 1015, that was passed this year, which made overtime protections permanent for domestic workers, but also passing overtime also for farm workers, that equal to make it equal overtime with other workers. But we still have a lot more to do. SB 1015, while it makes overtime permanent for domestic workers, it is still after 9 hours daily and 45 hours per week. So it's also not in proportion to what other workers mostly get after 8 and after 40 in a week. And there are still and a lot of the work that needs to be done is around enforcement and implementation of the protections that we've been able to pass. So while we have new wage theft laws and protections, one is about how then are the local agencies implementing them at the city, county, and state level. Because there are still many in these industries that are not able to get their wages. And because of the confluence of immigration status, of course, it makes it much more difficult, and there are many barriers for our community to actually go through the process of collecting their wages as as wage theft survivors. There are a large number of labor trafficking victims as well in our communities, notably like Thai farm workers as well as Filipino domestic workers are one of the largest growing numbers of identified labor trafficking cases. And we would really like to see how we can help protect workers who are starting to try to stand up for their rights. We do have some laws that protect against retaliation, but they also need to be strengthened, and cases about workers who are able to stand up for their rights in our community need to be made visible. U visas now have an expanded capacity to protect workers who are victims of retaliation and extortion. But in practice yet, we don't have as much cooperation or coordination as we need, especially from government agencies, and helping to certify and make sure that these workers who are just standing up for their rights are protected with these protections. We also need to make sure that there are cultural and linguistically appropriate and accessible workforce programs so that our communities are able to access these programs. And as it was said before, it's not just about translation, but how are these programs relevant and how do they actually connect to the industries that our communities are in? In the Filipino community, it's also thought that we don't need we have a lower need for linguistically accessible workforce programs, but especially in very specific industries where language is very specific, there are a lot of language needs still. It's not full ESL, but for them to actually be successful in these jobs, there's other types of language programs that are necessary to make them accessible. And we just need to make sure that our communities are included in all of the safety nets, programs for education, for medical care, for actually being able to access also workers' compensation as well, so that our families, are able to work and be healthy and live with dignity, both in their workplaces but also in their communities.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all for your presentations. Senator Child, did you have some questions for this panel?
I just have a quick question for clarification for Ms. Soriano. And if you can elaborate on the certification of the U visa one more time. I wasn't following exactly what's needed there. So this is with respect to the U visa and retaliation by potential employers. When it comes to certification, is that what you explained?
Yes. So if a worker is filing a claim or filing a case against an employer, now a U visa could cover retaliation by the employer. But where it's different than a T visa does not need an active case. They need to just be available for cooperating with law enforcement. For U visa, you need specific certification from the Division of Labor Standards and Enforcement or from a law enforcement body in terms of this of the crime occurring against the worker. So there haven't been many cases because it's fairly new. We haven't seen as many cases where we get certification, partly because it depends on if the agencies have certain policies where there needs to be an active case under their agency, or some cases are not necessarily prosecutable, however. But they're not also then certifying unless it's an active case under them. So like with the T visa, we had to kind of really see how it could move smoothly and educate people all along the way about the process and the availability of that protection. So that needs to be done also for the U visa as well, so that workers, who are afraid of retaliation, for example, being reported to immigration by their employers, that would be an act of retaliation, that they know that there is also protection for them, and that we actually have pathways and people within the different agencies, the enforcement agencies, who are educated about it, and that we can also have clear coordination about what are the thresholds and what are the clear indicators, so that community and advocates can also work together to make sure that these protections are being extended.
Thank you.
So again, I want to thank you all for your testimony. I think I'm going to pose the same question I asked the previous panel. So we're talking here in this hearing about immigration. We've heard the statistics that the API collectively are the largest immigrant group now, fastest growing. Actually, a majority of API collectively are actually foreign-born. So and yet at the same time, we don't vote. We vote at lower rates. So it's 11% of the voters are projected in 2016. We'll have to wait for November to find out what the actual percentage is. Projected to be 11% are API voters, but yet we're 15% of the population. Now that's total population, is not registered voters, citizenship, etc. But my guess is there's still a pretty sizable gap between the numbers and the percentage that's voting. And certainly immigration is a top issue in this particular election, as well as it's been an ongoing issue. So I want to ask all of you, and I guess you particularly, Ms. Tula, maybe talk about the NHPI communities more specifically. How important is immigration How important are immigration policies and immigration as an issue for the API and HPI community, and to what degree does that help? Does that then get mobilized people to actually exert their franchise? I know part of it's actually getting some people to actually become citizens, but and I know that how do we communicate what's going on, and how do we empower people to say, actually, I should exercise my franchise, my ability to vote, to be able to make progress where it's been stalled for so many years. So maybe we'll start with you, Mr. Kuo, and we just go down the line on that question.
Well, I think that immigration is an important issue, but it's not at the top of the list when we've done our own polling. It is kind of a welcoming sign, and if somebody is anti-immigrant or is perceived to be anti-immigrant, then they don't have a good reception on the issues. Because if you're not going to treat immigrants well on education or in employment or in voting rights, then it's almost a non-starter. So I think while the polling we've done showed that Asian Americans overwhelmingly want comprehensive immigration reform, it wouldn't be the top three in terms of their overall issues. So I think that what we found is that, say, 85% of Asian Americans, it's a little higher for Chinese Americans, want an expansion of the UC and CSU system, so more students have an opportunity to get a college education. So I think for those candidates who are addressing that, they will find a lot of receptiveness in our community. I think that the Asian Americans are, while they lean Democratic, there's a big decline to state independent voters. So I think we have to be able to show what the issues are. For example, I don't know if he's still here, the World Journal had a debate on different propositions this last weekend. So I think that kind of stimulation of the discussion in the community about important issues, not just the issues that the candidates espouse, but the issues on ballot propositions, is very important. Also, we helped API Vote in our office got John Cho, Constance Wu, and George Takei to do a nice video on getting out the vote. I've noticed fresh off the boat, I saw one video of the kids they said, if we're concerned, you should be able to get out there because you can vote. So I think there's all sorts of methods that we can use. Some of us with the Filipino Workers Center and EPIC and we and 17 other groups have banded together to really get out the vote. And we're going to try to continue working over the next few years because I suspect that we'll see pretty big bump ups on our citizenship rate, on our voter registration rate, and even on our get out the vote November 8th. What we're concerned about is keeping that up in 2017. There's a governor's election in 2018. Are we going to have that same bump up or not? So I think what we would like to see is over the next 5 years, we would like to see parity of our population with at least the average of citizenship applications, of voter registration, and actual voting over the next few years. So we're in partnership as well as some of the other speakers today. So we'll work with you to make sure that happens.
Thank you. And then I forgot to say thank you to both of you for supporting AB 1726 and that fight for us. Immigration is a really complex issue for our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities, specifically because our different groups have very different relationships with the U.S. that then have different immigrant designations. And so I think, however, it's still a very important issue, especially for our communities that fall under the designation of immigrant, which are largely Tongan and Fijian populations, our fast-growing populations here in California. Our prediction is that we have a large undocumented populations under some of those groups, but we don't have that data. And so as an organization, it's something that we're looking at, what are ways that we can quantify our undocumented numbers, because the conversation around immigration gets lost even within our community because of the different designations. Some of our populations are national, some are citizens, some are First Nations. And so some of the work belongs to our own community, educating our own population about the stake we have in each other to be able to advocate on behalf of one another. Because oftentimes, if you come from a national designated population, you don't often feel like you have any stake in undocumented conversations. And so some of the work that we're doing within our own community is to educate them to be advocates for one another. And then that ties really closely into voter education and our work that we've been doing under Advancing Justice. We're part of their citizenship work, naturalizing our communities that have been here for decades and are still green card holders. And that has become something where we can insert conversations about why voting is important. Another way that we're doing that is we run leadership development program and educating our young leaders about speaking up on behalf of one another. And so and I think even the conversation around data disaggregation, when we talk about that with our community, there's a lot of feelings and emotions attached to being acknowledged by California as part of this state. And so the fact that they can see Fijian, Tongan, Samoan on a form makes them feel more bought into being part of this, their citizenship here. And so we utilize a lot of those same talking points to encourage and empower our communities to get out and vote. And so since 2012, we've been part of the coalition with Advancing Justice, Your Vote Matters. And actually this year, we just had our first phone bank on Saturday. It's the first time we've ever had just a Pacific Islander specific phone bank supported by Advancing Justice, calling Pacific Islanders across California. I don't think that's something that exists anywhere else in the country. And so we're making history through some of the work that we're doing. And hopefully we'll be able to make some dent in some of the other issues that our communities face.
So I mean, definitely immigration is a big issue when it comes to worker issues in our community because we have such a large immigrant population, and it's not only low income workers as well, but there are a lot of the way that the immigration system is set up with worker visas, with guest worker programs, J1 visitor quote unquote programs that create very vulnerable situations for workers where they end up being taken advantage of, either from threat of deportation or because it's very difficult because your visa is tied to your employer. So even in engineering jobs, teacher jobs, sometimes their wages are depressed and they're working longer hours just because of their immigration status. But in reaching out to our communities, we actually have been, we're celebrating the 1 year anniversary of Empleo Pinoy, which is based on the Empleo program that was launched over a decade ago for the immigrant population of the Latino community. And so Empleo Pinoy is a hotline and education outreach program that is a partnership together with government agencies, Department of Labor, EEOC, DLSE, and others, and community groups, and creates an access point that is culturally and linguistically, accessible to our community. So it's very intimidating to go to the Department of Labor if you think you might have a problem or you're not sure, or even if you know. So this is a way that they can call in, ask questions, and then they can also, if they have specific cases, have their cases intaked and then shepherded to the right place, either government agencies, or maybe multiple if there's discrimination or there's wage and hour violations. They don't have to go around searching for help, but it's kind of a one-stop shop that it makes it accessible. So, yeah.
Can I just add one last thing? Is I'd like to make a request of Asian Americans in the State Assembly and the State Senate. After this next election, because immigration is such an important issue, 1.3 million Asian Americans being undocumented and well over 1.5 million relatives on waiting list, we think that it would be really great for our elected officials, and we certainly would support it and parallel this, to call for immediate work on resolving a lot of our immigration issues. And we're prepared to not only support it nationally, but also to do some demographic work in certain key states that show that immigrants are contributing, and that whether they're documented or undocumented, there needs to be a resolution on these immigration issues. So we'd love to work with you, and I think your voice could go beyond California. California has a strong, in the last 20 years, a strong voice on being more pro-immigrant, but I think Asian American legislators can have a strong voice throughout the country.
Thank you, and I think that's part of the reason for this hearing, so we can set that platform. I do have Ms. Tula, I have a question to ask you about, we have this umbrella we called API, Asian Pacific Islanders, and I know as someone who represents Sacramento, where you have a large NHPI community, that some in the NHPI community, well, actually more than some, are concerned about, are we in the umbrella? Are we out of the umbrella? Do we get swallowed up by the umbrella? Right? And I'll just give an example from my own profession of medicine. There's a definition that's used among medical schools for what we call underrepresented minorities. And they look at it and they say, API, you're not underrepresented. But clearly NHPI are underrepresented, and actually portions of the API, the Asian American population, underrepresented. We happen to be overrepresented by Chinese Americans and some other groups. So, and in fact, I pushed for a more, nuanced definition when it comes to underrepresented minorities, especially related to the API. So I appreciate your perspective, and you also mentioned certainly in relation to immigration, it's a bit more mixed also for the NHPI community. how do we elevate the voice of NHPI in both within the umbrella or outside the umbrella if necessary? Maybe you can. Do you have some? Can you share with me your thoughts about what this committee and what our API caucus and what we should be doing to elevate the NHPI voice?
I'm probably not the right person to ask the question to, but I'll do my best. I think that solidarity is really important, and being part of the larger umbrella has been very useful in terms of elevating our voices. As everybody here knows, our numbers are very small. I mean, we're really a siloed community, a lot of times. The Samoan community is in one area and the Tongan community, and so even within our own community, we kind of tend to stay close to each other. I think and you can see that even in the larger umbrella, but I believe that being able to stand side by side with the Cambodian community, Laotian community, Hmong community, who have the same kinds of issues, the same kinds of statistics as our communities, gives a voice to a lot of our issues. And so in terms of that, it is very useful for our work, because then we get to have a louder voice than if we stood on our own. On the other hand, I believe that a lot of times we become invisible just because I think of a lack of awareness of inclusion of our community in many conversations. But I believe that, with folks that are in this room and folks like you that are aware of the inclusion of our voices, that has become better over the years, and we really appreciate a lot of the advocates, Stuart and folks that are here for the work that they have done to continue to include our voices in many of the discussions. And so there's still a lot of work to be done. This is something that we also talk to within our own community about the need for us to stand in solidarity and the need for us to be an ally with our Asian American communities and learn about each other and our own and being able to own the voice to say, include us in these conversations. And so I'm not sure if that's a good enough opinion, but that's what we think. That's what I think, at least.
No, thank you. No, I appreciate that. And I know that there's also diversity of voices within your own community, so I'm not expecting you to speak for everyone. But I appreciate that perspective, and we want to be sure that those voices didn't get lost. And I know that in their discussion about the desegregation bill that Senator Bonta carried, and I was proud to jockey in the Senate, that we want to be sure that we recognized, and there's some work we need to do within the API community to be sure to have others understand it within our community. So, thank you. Well, again, I want to thank you all for your testimony, and again, thank you so much for your time and your presentations. Thank you. So next up, applause work. All right, so next up we have our international issues panel, and we have we have Marshall Wong, who's on steering committee member of API Equality Los Angeles. We have Masia Fuladi with Council of American Islamic Relations at Greater LA, and I understand that he is on his way, so we'll take him up last. And then we have Lian Chun, Executive Director of Khmer's Girls in Action. So why don't we go ahead and begin with Marshall and Okay, so so we'll want to begin with Marshall, and then we'll go with Leon, and then Messiah is here. And actually, just before we move on, apparently I got a request from some of our Asian media for my Chinese name, which is Pan Juanda. So it's also on my card. So thank you. All right, welcome, and thank you for being here. Start with Mr. Wong. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm Marshall Wong, and I'm co-chair of API Equality LA, an organization that has been advancing LGBT equality in the Asian American and Pacific Islander community for the past 11 years. We formed in 2005 in response to large homophobic rallies in opposition to same-sex marriage that were held in San Francisco and in the city of Alhambra, just down the road from here, organized by conservative Chinese ministers. The rallies were covered extensively in the Chinese language media. It was like an alarm that went off, and we set out to do what no one had ever done before, build a broad-based Asian American coalition of organizations and individuals who represented the ethnic, gender, and generational diversity within our community, united around an LGBT civil rights issue. We were deeply involved in the campaign against Prop 8, conducting thousands of one-on-one conversations with Asian voters at cultural festivals from the San Gabriel Valley down to the South Bay. We marched through the streets of Chinatown, Little Tokyo, and Koreatown, organized phone banks, canvassed door-to-door, held press conferences and media briefings aimed at the Asian language press, conducting research on what effective messaging would move Asian voters in the direction of acceptance, tolerance, and equality. Since the Supreme Court victory that made marriage equality the law of the land, we focused on some other issues that we want to share with you. In particular, supporting our API youth, because one thing that you cannot legislate is family acceptance. We've held workshops on coming out in Asian families. We've established a website, Q&A space, that provides resources for young Asian Americans who are in the process of coming out to their families. And what does family acceptance look like? Well, just this past Saturday, Congressman Mike Honda spoke before a conference of 200 Japanese Americans expressing his support for his 9-year-old transgender granddaughter. We've also been participating in Transform California, which promotes awareness about transgender issues and tells the stories and experiences and aspirations of the lives of trans people, as well as preparing to beat back any legislation that might try to overturn the rights of trans people to be able to use the bathrooms and facilities that are in line with their gender identity. And this anti-trans legislation has been sweeping the nation. And finally, as you are aware, several years ago, the California legislature passed a bill mandating that the contributions of LGBT people be included in social studies curriculum in all public schools. But there's a dearth of materials that represents communities of color. And so to help fill that gap, we are conducting interviews with the earliest generation of Asian American LGBT civil rights activists under our Pioneers Project and creating study guides and grade appropriate curriculum so that when the story of the contributions of LGBT people are told, it will be multicultural. I want to end by sharing a story that in June of 2015, after the Supreme Court established marriage equality as the law of the land, we again heard that Chinese ministers were going to mobilize and have a rally right in the city of San Gabriel to protest the marriage equality. We had only 48 hours to organize, but we were able to mobilize more than 120 people there, and our opposition had less than 20. And we were able to have a press conference featuring Congresswoman Judy Chu, San Gabriel Mayor Jason Pu, Garvey School District member Henry Lowe, and countless other local elected officials who showed their support for marriage equality. So I think that that's a demonstration of how far we've come in 11 years in being able to tip the balance of public opinion in the direction of equality. Thank you.
Thank you. So next up we'll have Lian Chung, and then we'll. Chung.
Hello. Hi. Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator Pan, for your leadership for establishing the Select Committee. My name is Lian Chen, and I'm the Executive Director of Khmer Girls in Action. We are a community-based organization located in Long Beach. We work to develop socially conscious and politically active young people in our community, and we develop our young people's leadership so that they could organize and advocate on issues that are important in our community. And today I was asked to talk a little bit about intersectional issues. So in particularly how intersectional issues impact our women and girls. And I think talking about some of these issues we can't talk about some of these issues without understanding and addressing kind of the larger challenges that are facing our families and our community. Long Beach is home to the largest Cambodian community in the United States. The legacy of the genocidal horror of the Khmer Rouge was transported to resettled communities like Long Beach, manifesting in higher levels of domestic, criminal, and gang violence. A research conducted by RAND in 2005 found that after 2.5 decades of resettlement, that an astonishing 62% of Cambodian refugees in Long Beach suffer post-traumatic stress disorder, and that is a level higher than combat veterans returning home from war. And PTSD is hugely taboo in our community. A huge part of that is due to survival guilt. Many of the folks who were able to escape Cambodia came to this country feeling extremely lucky to be alive. And many Southeast Asian refugees have limited formal education, little or no exposure to Western-style school, to the English language, or to the American way of life prior to resettlement. War, genocide, and forced migration have fractured and destabilized the Southeast Asian family, especially the Cambodian American family. A large number of Cambodian women are widows, and many households are single female-headed, and also we have the majority of households are actually multi-generational households. Cambodian refugees in particular were resettled in housing projects, impoverished neighborhoods, places where local residents were already suffering from unrelenting poverty, where folks were vulnerable to crime, violence, structural disadvantage, racism, discrimination, and profiling. Many of our folks got swept up on the war on drugs and criminalization of poverty and survival strategies. So under these circumstances, Cambodia in the United States reflects some of the lowest socioeconomic indicators. 45% of the adult population suffer from 4 or more chronic diseases, and I think Dr. Pan, for you, as a doctor, you might understand kind of what the implication of that. And one of the highest death rate in the 50 to 60-year-old range. Cambodian youth also have very high ACE score, the Adverse Childhood Experience score, due to our family history and current circumstances. In KJ's study with UCLA, we found that 49% of second-generation Cambodian youth in Long Beach show symptoms of depression. Trauma and chronic stress have direct impact on health and the well-being of our community, and such exposure to the persistent form of trauma that results from violence, unstable housing, and broader effects of poverty and racism takes its toll. And this in particular for women and girls who often inhabit the multiple roles of caregiver, interpreters, and all the multiple things that they do for our family. And because I have limited time, I'm gonna skip ahead. And at our work at KJ, we talk about a lot of these issues as compounded intergenerational and intersectional trauma, and women bear the brunt of a lot of the social-emotional labor while trying to keep our families afloat. Because we do gender justice work, we center the experiences of young women and girls, and we believe that in order for our women and girls to be safe, to heal, to be free from violence, and to have our dignity upheld, we need to work collectively to dismantle state and gender violence. One of the ways we have approached this is by working with boys, young men, and young people across the gender spectrum in our community to be allies and to collectively work to dismantle patriarchy. Within this context, KGA also worked with the Alliance of Boys and Men of Color in California to shed light on the diversity of AAPI experiences and to uplift the narrative of the unjust deportation that's happening in our community. In doing so, we support young men's ability to become a healing force for themselves and for the women in their lives. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the 1996 immigration law that have resulted in the rise of mass deportation and have separated millions of families. For the Cambodian diaspora in the United States, this has hit our community particularly hard. We call it the school to prison to deportation pipeline. This pipeline is very familiar to the 1.5 generation Cambodians. The school to prison to deportation pipeline is not only messed up, it's retroactive, meaning those who have taken accountability for their wrongdoing and have served their time are receiving a lifetime sentence in the form of deportation back to a home country that they have fled or have never stepped foot in. The impact on our communities are often neglected in the mass deportation machine. Our country has been complicit to the endangerment of refugee communities and deportees. Because of the fact that most of the deportees are men in our community, the majority of whom are breadwinners for our families, women and girls are left to pick up the pieces. One of KJ's members recently said that when her brother was serving his sentence and then subsequently deported back to Cambodia, even though her and her mother were on the outside, they too were serving time. Our families experience continuous cycle of violence from one side of the world to the other. From war to bombings to refugee camps to displacement to poverty to incarceration to deportation. The collateral damage, the human cost, and the trauma weigh really heavy in our community, and many will continue to carry this weight for generations to come. Understanding the intersection of criminal justice and immigration is really important. We cannot continue to fight mass deportation without fighting mass incarceration in this country. These systems work together to remove people from our communities and break families apart. As a community that also came under asylum, we see deportation as a human rights violation. Families belong together, and removing people from our communities through deportation threatens our survival as people. Mandatory and institutionalized punishment should not be our route as a society to address the root causes of violence and poverty in our communities. Mandatory deportation is destructive, as it denies us of our individual and community capacity as human beings to grow, change, and heal. The current immigration and criminal justice system has proven to inflict more harm and add to the trauma of communities. And my time is up. So I look forward to continuing working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And finally, we'll have Mr. Fuladi from CARE. Welcome.
First, I want to apologize for being late. My name is Masih Fuladi. I'm a legal advocate at the Greater Los Angeles office of the Council on American Islamic Relations. CARE is a national organization whose mission is to empower American Muslims by enhancing the understanding of Islam, by promoting dialogue, by protecting civil liberties, and by creating and building coalitions that promote justice and mutual understanding. We have presence in over 30 states, and within California alone, we have 4 offices that make up the CARE California chapter. We have an office in Sacramento, San Francisco Bay Area, San Diego, and Los Angeles. I've been asked to speak about the intersectionality of issues of hate crimes and school bullying. October is actually Anti-Bullying Awareness Month. And we've been very busy in our local communities in Orange County and Los Angeles trying to promote the CARE's survey, school bullying survey, which is a part of a report that we do biannually. It's no surprise to anyone in the API community that there's been an increase in hate crimes in 2015 and 2016. A recent report by the OC Human Relations in Los Angeles showed that hate crimes against Asian Americans and Chinese Americans in particular tripled. That same report showed that hate crimes against Muslims increased by a multiplier of 6. A lot of these issues are due to the political rhetoric we've experienced in this election year. Members from the Asian community and Chinese community are often seen as hostile, especially when issues of trade and economic issues come up, and the Muslim community tends to suffer after both domestic and international occurrences of terrorism. We've been trying to empower our local communities by making them aware of local elections, and getting them out to vote. So much of our work with our partners has been to register individuals to vote and then get them out to vote come election day. We are also working with many organizations on the school bullying front, and I'm very happy to sit here and say that you were part of the Safe Places to Learn Act being passed, and it was recently signed by Governor Brown. And the focus of AB 2845 was to mandate school districts to provide school site and community resources for students who are subject to discrimination based on actual or perceived religious beliefs. And it also requires the State Superintendent of Public Instruction of California to require services and resources be available to students and families who are experiencing bullying. I think this is a really important step in the right direction, and we hope to build on that. We were very happy to co-sponsor the bill with Asian Americans Advancing Justice California, with the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund and the Sikh Coalition. The Sikh community has also seen both an increase in hate crimes. Recently there was an incident in Bakersfield with a man being attacked outside of a Habit Burger just because he was wearing a turban. I'm very happy to report that the police department in Bakersfield looked at that case and reported it to the district attorney as a hate crime, and we hope to see hate crime charges coming to play there. But the Sikh community, especially individuals who wear turbans, have seen a great increase in school bullying incidents. The Sikh Coalition has reported that 50% of Sikh students have encountered school bullying. This number increases significantly for turban students, who 67% have encountered bullying. In Fresno alone, 51% of students surveyed by the Sikh Coalition reported that they felt school officials did not respond adequately to bullying incidents. Similarly, our school bullying report in 2015 reported that 55% of American Muslim students attending California public schools experienced some form of bullying based on their religious identity. That it was twice, and that's twice as high as the national statistics for students who are reporting being bullied at school. We think it's important to have discussions like this, have committees like this, and for our local and state representatives to be informed about these issues and the great work that we're trying to do with our partners on the ground. Really, going forward, we're just looking to see more momentum from local organizations and officials so that we can build on our recent successes, and hopefully by turning out the vote on in November, we can show our local representatives that the API community and the Muslim community and the Sikh communities are here to stay, and we're going to continue to work every 2 years and hopefully not just wait for presidential elections to turn out the vote. Thank you.
Hey, well, thank you all for your testimony. I think many of you probably weren't, because you just got in when I was talking about in my opening that first of all, in regards to Muslim Americans, that Asia actually, I believe, has the largest Muslim population of any part of the world. So discrimination against Muslim Americans is also discrimination against Asian Americans or Pacific Islander colleagues as well, who are the Muslim faith. So that's, there's a direct intersection right there. Also, the rhetoric that's been used is one that's a result that the API community has seen in the past. We talk about the rhetoric to ban all Muslims from the United States. Actually, Chinese Americans and then other Asian Americans were excluded. The Exclusion Acts back in, we thought that was old history, but I guess not. In terms of some of those issues. So I guess one of the things that wanted to ask you and touch on is we have a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric going on. Particularly, it's happened, but particularly this election cycle, Islamic rhetoric. What can the API community do from your perspective and CARE to try to mobilize against that, and certainly at the ballot box, be sure we send the message that this type of rhetoric and this kind of politics is actually a losing proposition and one that is rejected by most Americans.
Well, thank you. I think one of the issues that the Muslim community faces and CARE often faces is that not only are these bigoted comments being made, but they're being magnified in the media. And I feel that a lot of times as Muslims and Middle Easterners, we don't have the resources and access to the media to have our voices and our stories put in a way where it's not on the defensive. It's often after an incident occurs. There's a token individual who's invited to speak on a panel, and the issue has already been framed, and it's a very defensive conversation, as opposed to having those relationships and having the ability to come on and just display our everyday work for the community, whether it be the Muslim, whether it be the, and I completely agree that the API community and the Muslim community aren't two separate communities. And to show the work that we're doing in the community and that the work we're doing to benefit all Americans, I think that's something that we continue to work on and work to increase our voice in the media, because at the end of the day, no politician, no individual would have that microphone and ability to expand on their bigotry without the media. Other things that we try to do, I think, and the API community experiences is our communities are very insulated, meaning they don't want to report incidents. Whether it be in Los Angeles or across the state, the numbers of reports that we see to the public are actually much less than those we see to CARE. And the numbers that CARE receives, again, are very microscopic in comparison to what the community is experiencing, and that's just this, that comes from a lack of trust. And I think the more we work with members of the API community and with local and state officials, the media, that trust will begin to build, and those incidents will become more reported. And then once we have those numbers, we can see more concrete change.
Did you want to say?
If you don't mind, I'd like to comment as well on
Please,
that,
of course.
because I actually happen to be the principal author of the report on hate crime. One of the things that we see is that although hate crime and bullying within school contexts is rampant, that those don't get reported in actual hate crime counts. That frequently what happens is that schools administrators will deal internally through things like suspensions or other kinds of punishment, but they don't wind up reporting them out as hate crimes to show up in the official tallies. And so we know that there's a huge gap in the data that tracks actual harassment and hate crime in the schools. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed. A second is that for some time now, the dollars that have been available for training of law enforcement in the area of hate crime has been thin at best, and that many municipalities don't have the resources to be able to adequately train smaller police departments in how to detect hate crimes, how to appropriately deal with victims of hate crime, and how to report. And then finally, as was just mentioned by the speaker from CARE, because particularly when communities are culturally and linguistically isolated, they have anxiety about reporting crime to police for a whole variety of reasons. And one of the things that we need to be able to do is to provide funding and resources to community-based organizations that are trusted in those communities so that they can serve as the conduit for taking reports of hate crime and providing assistance to victims.
Thank you. My next question, actually, Ms. Chun, I know you talked about this school to prison to deportation pipeline, and I was hoping that you can elaborate a little bit about exactly. So we have, and please correct me if I'm wrong. We have refugees. Actually, we're talking about we have issues about rhetoric against refugees too, from Syria more, but I mean we're talking about women and children in this case, refugees. So we've obviously there's many API, as I said in my introduction, that were actually refugees that then came to this country. So you have people who came to the country as refugees who of course are bringing their traumatic experiences as refugees to this country, and either they or their descendants are now in this pipeline. Can you just elaborate a bit more on what's going on and thoughts about what we can do about that, particularly pertaining to both the Cambodian population but also other refugee populations in this country?
Yes, absolutely, and thanks for asking that question. The school to prison to deportation pipeline, we're using it as a framework, in particularly to illuminate what had happened to the 1.5 generation, the folks who came as child refugees into the U.S. Institutions were very ill prepared to accept the amount of refugees, Southeast Asian refugees, that were being resettled in a lot of the communities. And in large part, due to the high poverty rate, the challenges, the criminalization of poverty behavior, and the way in which young people were trying to support themselves and their families, a lot of those young people got caught up in the system, and oftentimes because the schools don't have either the support mechanism or a culturally responsive way to refugees who are entering the institution, it pretty much cycle folks. The more, and there's tons of research around this, the more young people aren't engaged in school and the more they're out on the street, they're more likely to get caught up in the juvenile justice system, and a huge portion of that 1.5 generation got caught up in that system. And so, and the crazy thing is, for many of these folks, they have already served their time, right? So they're kind of caught up in limbo. And currently, there's an estimated 16,000 folks, Southeast Asian refugees, who have final deportation orders. And for folks who have kind of turned their life around and try to, and already have children here in the U.S. as well, they're being sent back to Cambodia. And so, the president went to Laos in September, and there's a fear that a repatriation agreement is also being negotiated with Laos. And for the Hmong community, there's roughly 4,500 folks right now under deportation order, but since Laos don't have a repatriation agreement, they're not accepting the refugees right now as of yet. So anyway, all this to say, and there's a lot of learning lessons that I think many of the Southeast Asian community have experienced during the resettlement process that I think are good learning opportunities, both for what we could do currently in the community, but also for new refugees coming into this country, particularly when U.S. U.S. foreign policy have had intervened in some of our home countries, the role that folks have played there and why folks are here, and why it's just so hard and difficult for family to see their family members being deported back. Some of the ways in which we have work around some of these issues is to really look at the intersection of immigration issue, which is really, I know, really difficult right now with Congress being the way it is, and electoral season. But what we are interested in is really thinking about how we center conversation and narrative around keeping families together, because I think that narrative cuts across racial lines, and it also help us not divide and conquer, with some of the community. And I think collectively we're stronger together when we kind of center family-friendly language. And also, I think, what I also mentioned is that the immigration system and the criminal justice system is super difficult to deal with, and they kind of, in some way, work hand in hand. And so for us, we want to fix the 1996 laws, and I think if there's any way to move and push on that, that will definitely help. I also think California should make sure that we have robust safety net for our people, because for folks who have lost a family member who's a breadwinner, they plummet back into poverty. And oftentimes, sometimes the safety nets are no longer available and have very limited availability. So I think we need to look at some of that on that end as well to, to counter some of the poverty that folks are experiencing. And I'm not, I think there's a lot of things, which includes the way in which our schools and our institution engage with each other. There's a case right now in Minnesota where if folks are deported, actually a couple cases in California as well, sometimes the children get placed into foster care if they lose, if their father get deported, because sometimes people don't have official marriage license. And so there's been, there's a lot of intersection of various institutions that get caught up in this situation. And I could definitely provide, I think, more information and be in contact with your office. I feel like there's just a lot to go through, and it's a very challenging and difficult situation. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, and just one last question, actually, for Mr. Wong. So the experience you described in for the LGBT community, LGBT API community, actually sound like part of it was actually internal divisions within the API community. You had these Chinese pastors, you said, who rallying in, and I know that unfortunately we've seen some other efforts to actually divide the API community. We had this year we had an effort to essentially take frankly the Chinese American community and pit them against Pacific Islanders around disaggregation and so forth. Can you perhaps speak to your experience in fighting for LGBT rights within the API community, your thoughts about what can we do as a community to address the fact that sometimes people try to play one part against the other, and I would say more importantly, how do we be sure we stand up for the rights for LGBT API in that context, and what your thoughts are in your experience with these situations in terms of when someone tries to take one part of our community and use that as the way to try to say that the API community doesn't support something, when clearly I think, as you saw in your own demonstration, that the majority of the API community actually is supporting our LGBT brothers and sisters within the API community.
Well, one of the things that's been very important has been, as I mentioned earlier, working with the Asian language media. Before we came onto the scene, we did some analysis of the kind of content in particularly Chinese newspapers, and we found that that the reporters didn't know where to turn to get alternative voices. So they would quote some of these ministers who would say things like same-sex marriage will lead to the spread of disease and AIDS, which is completely false, or that same-sex marriage would cause families to break up, and these were unsubstantiated kinds of causes of charges that reporters did not fact check, and they didn't know where to turn to. And so since we came on the scene, we've seen the coverage much more balanced. Why is this important? Because the research shows that for Chinese American voters, about 50% get their information from Chinese language sources, which influences how they perceive the world and how they vote. Okay, so I think that balanced media coverage, particularly in the ethnic press, is a very important arena. I think so we've really turned the corner there, but that's something that we have to be constantly vigilant about. A second arena is what gets taught in the public schools, and as I mentioned before, we are seeing now textbooks that will start to reflect the contributions of LGBT people, which is as important as putting into place things like anti-bullying policies, because it's not just enough to resist or punish bad behavior. You have to actually educate people about the contributions and benefits that have resulted from from out LGBT people participating in every walk of life. As I mentioned, though, there's a dearth of material to tell the multicultural story. So it's not just important for Asian American young people to hear the story of Harvey Milk. They also need to learn about people like Dean Goishi, who was an earlier warrior in the fight against AIDS and HIV in the Asian American community. And I think that those kinds of important lessons help teach tolerance and respect, so that people will be less likely to be influenced when they hear misinformation from conservative clergy.
And if I can add something on point with what's being taught in the schools, one issue that we've experienced working with our partners in the LGBT community, Sikh community, Muslim community, oftentimes what's in the textbooks and the material discussing Islam, Muslims, the LGBT community, Sikh community is just outdated, and there's a lot of Islamophobic bias in that material. Additionally, teachers are often ill-equipped to discuss issues surrounding terrorism. For example, a discussion of 9/11, instead of focusing on the act, the terrorism, the politics behind it, often gets discussed as an issue of theology, which couldn't be farther from the truth. And then lastly, for teachers to recognize when a comment to any of these communities is bullying. Oftentimes we've heard the comment, well, that was just a joke, but they don't understand the repercussions when members of these communities are hearing this 5 years, 10 years down the line. And just the environment in general, if one student's making the comment in front of a teacher and the teacher isn't taking any action, then that just continues to multiply, and that student just doesn't feel safe in school anymore. So those are issues that we would love to work with you and our partners to address.
If I may, also, I testified earlier this year at a meeting of the Governor's Commission on Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs, and in the conversation about rising Islamophobia, one of the things that we discussed is the need for perhaps legislation that would require the contributions of Muslim Americans to also be taught in public schools.
Well, I want to thank you all for your testimony and for being here. Thank you so very much, and really appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. So finally, again, I want to thank all the speakers for their presentation. We'll now accept, we'll take any public testimony. We'll give, I'm going to put a time limit of 2 minutes, just so. So if people want to line up, we'll use that microphone then.
No, it's late.
No, this one? Okay, we'll use this microphone. All right. Actually, we're going to use this microphone here, just a public comment microphone. So if we can, please introduce yourself, and if you're representing the organization, name of the organization, and again, please try to limit your remarks to 2 minutes. But
I
thank
would
you.
just like it, maybe I could have a minute or two extra. My name's Mark Masaoka. I'm with the Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council, an association of about 40 primarily social service nonprofits in Los Angeles County. And it's complicated for me to say this because on the one hand, we're very appreciative of the work that you and others in the API caucus have done for our communities. But I would be remiss if I didn't speak about the very severe lack of resources our API nonprofits have in being able to deliver the kinds of culturally competent services that our communities need for effective immigrant integration. It's a combination of attitudes, whether it's still the model minority or just the sense that other oppressed communities have circumstances so dire and so harsh and they're so oppressed that they feel that all the necessary resources have to go there. Not now, but before we had a county supervisor who had 40 staff with substantial API populations in the district, yet did not have one single API staff because that was not seen as a high enough priority. And while we have many API nonprofits, the majority of our members have 7 or less staff. So if you take out a director and administrative staff, what do you have really left to be able to provide substantial services? And part of it is structures. We have place-based programs which prioritize funds going to the lowest, the zip codes with the lowest socioeconomic data. But the way our API communities access services is people travel long distances, limited English speaking, to go to the historical enclaves of Filipino town, Thai town, Koreatown, to access services from those agencies that can give them their language from the front door to the back. And that pattern is not served by existing funding structures. So that's why we have groups like First 5 LA. Maybe 1 or 2, and even in areas where they have lots of APIs, 2 to 4% are served by APIs. The same thing with the family source centers, the same thing with the work source centers here in the San Gabriel Valley. They are not equipped to effectively serve API populations. Even here, some of the cities are 50% Asian. Their work source serves maybe 4 to 5% APIs. And so the other problem is that our even in areas like Koreatown, Thai town, Cambodia town, our API populations are still a minority. It's still predominantly another oppressed community. And therefore, the lion's share of the resources naturally go to the principal population in that area. So in all of these areas, our communities are really trying to get some subcontracts from some of the bigger agencies, which is never sufficient to serve the needs that they have to not only serve their community, but their community throughout the county. 4 years ago, Assemblyman Mike Ng and Warren Furutani did have a hearing exploring these problems, and we struggled to find some legislative solutions to address that. So I bring this to your attention because just to urge you to keep this on the agenda as we continue to try to work for solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you bringing this issue up. As I mentioned, I think earlier, for example, when I was chair of the Assembly Health Committee, we were trying to roll out Cover California, and I did get pushback when they said, well, there's so many languages, et cetera. And even when we think about API outreach for, let's say, voter registration, and actually the amount of resources per new registrant is often higher because we're trying to be because of the different not only languages but also different cultures and trying to reach out. So this is an ongoing issue, and I would say part of the answer also though is that this is also about engagement and getting people to stand up. As an elected official, I'll tell you that part of it is that the people who turn out and vote. Right. I mean, this is why I keep asking, what are you going to do to get people to vote and stand up and say something? And that's, we're having this hearing as well to try to elevate some of these issues as well, because the more we can get our own community to be engaged, then that sends a signal up to others that they need to pay more attention to our community, and it's total diversity. So so I hear what you're saying, and certainly that is something that I personally, as well as I know many of my colleagues in the API caucus are sensitive to and want to try to address, and it's something we're going to have to work on together. So the community needs to help turn out. Once we get some of us into elected office, like myself, we need to then work, and that's what I've tried to do in my interactions, with DMV, with Cover California, with others, and it's and then we need to continue that work. But thank you so much for bringing that up. Thank you. Right, welcome.
Thank you, Senator Penn. I just wanted to thank you and the committee for holding this conference here today. It's important.
Sorry, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, my name is Paul Chang. I'm with the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and I'm a regional advisor for this region, which covers many states. But I'd rather not name them. But it's important, as you can see, I was vigorously taking notes on many of the topics, and I really appreciate you giving us this opportunity to listen to this. Especially, I have to tread carefully since I am a career government person, but in our Leanne Chung, our commissioner, was appointed by the president to do just that, to listen to the community on issues such as labor. As you can hear, my background is with the Department of Labor, and I've been there for 20 some odd years. Worked with Advancing Justice for many years. Labor. You hear folks afraid of coming to the Labor Department. We formed partnerships with PwC and other community groups advancing justice, and I just wanted to point out on one issue. It's the T visas. More than 70% of T visas under trafficking are issued to victims from Asian Americans. U visas, the large numbers were issued to those from Mexico, and as you can see, this and the U visas, there's a very, very long backlog on U visas, as you may know. There are difficulties. When I was supervising the Orange County office for the Department of Labor Wage Hour Division, we handled some of the first U visa cases. Those are very important. We want to know how agencies can be efficient in terms of getting the services to the community. I just want to make sure that, I just wanted to say before we end, it's important that agencies work with the communities to bring the services together, and we'd like to see a state counterpart with that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for your service with the White House on our behalf. Thank you. All right. Seeing no other persons at the microphone, I just want to again thank all our speakers for taking the time to present and for sharing their experiences and knowledge with us. I also want to thank Assemblymember Chow and his office for helping set this up. The City of Rosemead, thank you so much for hosting us. And also Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and specifically Andrew Medina, who helped us organize this hearing. Thank you again for your tremendous work in making this hearing possible. With that, I want to thank everyone for being here. I think certainly I've learned a lot from listening to our speakers. I think we've been able to touch on many very important issues that affect the API community and around the issue of immigration and others as well. And so we hope that the information I've shared in this hearing will help us inform further policy and legislative action here in the state of California and even beyond our state. Hopefully we can take some leadership role in the nation in that regard as well. So with that, now adjourn the Select Committee hearing on the Select Committee for API Affairs. Thank you so very much.